we're actually here to talk about something that's, I think, pretty interesting. It's a slightly nebulous and mushy topic, but an important one nonetheless. It is, how do we talk to each other? How do we possibly communicate with different segments of the community? What happens when people read things on the internet? What happens when people read things in the internet and then talk about it in-game? What happens when people make things up on the internet and people believe it? These are all the questions that we're going to answer today, okay? Like, what happens if people say that Scourge is bad? It's a good question. It's a very good question, I think.
And it's going to sound very trivial to a lot of people, especially veteran players, but let's say you're jumping into Suwon and you start the last fight. How many people have you seen die to that first shockwave?
Yeah.
Quite a few, right?
A lot.
Now, really think about it. How many commanders have told people to jump that first shockwave?
Exactly.
Like, it sounds really trivial when you think about it, but that's the type of communication we're talking about. Because as trivial as it is, it does help.
I'm just gonna bite the bullet. I think the LFG system is so garbage.
So here's a question. How do we as a community set the line for what's good enough in terms of a build?
Wait, can you guys hear me though?
I can probably hear you, but not me. I know why this is. It's because... Do you know why this is, gamers? It's because I had a Windows update since my last TeaTime, and therefore, you just missed my entire amazing intro talking about how we're going to be discussing AFK farming in Maguma. Fortunately, I can repeat it because you didn't hear it. It's just the hosts have to, embrace me making the same joke twice. So yeah, that's it. Enjoy it. Enjoy our AFK farming in Maguma talk, except no, that wouldn't make any sense. We're actually here to talk about something that's, I think, pretty interesting. It's a slightly nebulous and mushy topic, but an important one nonetheless. It is, how do we talk to each other? How do we possibly communicate with different segments of the community? What happens when people read things on the internet? What happens when people read things in the internet and then talk about it in-game? What happens when people make things up on the internet and people believe it? These are all the questions that we're going to answer today, okay? Like, what happens if people say that Scourge is bad? It's a good question. It's a very good question, I think. But anyway, welcome everyone to the show. And of course, welcome to my wonderful host. We have, and this is going to be crazy. This is going to be very big. Honestly, to be frank, you can see I've divided the hosts into two halves here. We've got Sneb and Emi up there, myself and a brand new guest, Lowry here in the bottom from MMORPG.com. We're just going to watch the fireworks, actually, as Sneb and Emi are going to destroy each other in debate today. But anyway, welcome to the show, everyone. Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
Appreciate you having me for the first time. I'm just going to stay out the way while Sneb and Emi go at it.
Exactly.
Dark Emi versus Dark Sneb.
Have you seen... Please tell me you've all seen that new show that I think it was made by the guy who owns UFC or whatever. The one where they slap each other. Yes. They just like they stand there, and I just keep seeing all these clips where people just they wind up and they straight up knock people out by slapping them. And I just imagine that's the debate. That's what we're doing here.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. And well, let's kind of get straight into it. And I think a pretty good place to start, actually, kind of, is that point as well. I think that something's been coming up pretty frequently, actually. And well, honestly, it's a big thing in the history of the game is a certain degree of friction between different segments of the community. And I think this is most pronounced 100% with the interactions between like the open world community, I think is a good way of putting it, and the kind of instance content community as well. And the way those two groups interact, often there seems to be the way I would describe it. It's not even toxic. Actually, it's not that. It's a failure to communicate effectively. Is the way I would describe it. And I really want to explore like how we can actually improve on this a lot, because I think it is really important. Because something that I've seen really build up actually is that these two groups are actually opposed, right, or are adversarial to each other. Whereas I think this is absolutely not the case. I would say it's directly the opposite, in fact. I would say that players within this system are actually symbiotic, right? I think both groups help each other enormously and should help each other even more so than they already do. Really good example of this would be, the players who are kind of into more instance content, raiding, more hardcore, whatever you want to call it, build resources and create educational material so that players who are less experienced can learn about the game and, try new things, find different playstyles that they enjoy, and obviously have a greater degree of success, right? And of course, on the other hand, right, the players who essentially the raiders of tomorrow are the new players of today, right? That's the very nature of it, right? You have this kind of conveyor belt of players moving through, and some people will, try out different things and kind of get into that instance content there as well. But yeah, that's kind of the initial thing I want to go with. I just want to open that up, actually. I definitely think that Emi has some really interesting takes on this, so maybe yeah. Look at that grin. Okay, she's like, yes, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to unleash.
Okay, so I have a couple thoughts on that. And I think I want to start off by saying that I completely agree. I think both subsets of players in the game are really important, not just like for the community, but for the livelihood of the game, right? Because I think it's no secret, new players are probably the ones spending the most amount of money on the game, right? Because you have to buy the expansions, you're probably buying a lot of QOL, you're probably seeing like all of those shiny outfits in the gem store for the very first time. So you probably want to collect those too. But then after a certain point, right? Like let's say you've reached 2,000 hours in the game, you're probably just not going to have as much stuff to spend your money on, right? But then now you have the veteran players, right? This is where the veteran players kind of come in. Without these veteran players making YouTube guides and instance content guides and like, Hardstuck, like with all of like the in-game resources and out-of-game resources, all that kind of stuff, then new players would hit a wall long before they've exhausted their monetary value, so to speak, right? So I think both of these players are really, really important to the game continuing to thrive. So that's kind of like number one. I think number two is then how these players kind of interact is completely separate from this idea of like, their intrinsic monetary value to the game, right? Because we don't think about that. We're not the company. We're not responsible for the game doing well financially. So instead, what we tend to focus on is then the community aspect, right? So the communication part. And where I think a lot of this breaks down is when these two subsets of people, instead of seeing the value in each other, they see the detriment, right? So they see, okay, I only have 20 minutes to play today. I just want to knock out these strike missions super quickly. I'm going to join a group that's asking for EXP people. And then you have someone that wanders in, whether it's malicious or just ignorant. And then they come in, they're in like, wiping the group and stuff because they don't realize that there's this one-shot mechanic. Like, for example, on Kaineng strike mission, right? It's like, if you stand on the group with the number, congratulations, you've killed 6 people, right? So that's just like, the difference or the mismatch in expectations between these two different groups is where I think a lot of that tension comes from. And since there's no directly measurable way to see the value of these other players, it becomes a lot more, I think, just a lot more nebulous, right? It's a lot more vulnerable to your perception of this other person and not the actual reality of what this person represents to the game. So, yeah, I think that's like kind of like starting point number one. I don't know if anyone else wants to bounce off on that.
Yeah.
I mean, you said everything I was going to say. The big thing, and you touched on it, is that the game is like doesn't communicate any of this. Like, it's so hard to tell who's doing what, how they're doing it, and it's just it's a pain. It's a big pain, and it adds to this perceived tension of, players who like not necessarily a divide, but like the players who raid, the players who do open world, and the game just really, really needs more ways to bridge that gap. I feel, like way more ways. And it doesn't need to be that elaborate either. Like if somebody joins my group and they're a quickness build, I can /info or whatever, and I just see like the quickness icon. That'd be cool. Like, that's all I need. Like, if they're traded into it, then it should show up. I don't need to see the exact gear or whatnot, but that's just like a step. Like, it doesn't have to be perfect, but it's a step in the right direction. And we don't even have that. Like,
yeah, I think kind of building off of that, I think there's two kind of big problems that I see right now. One is obviously like the community like communication breakdown, right? Is like these two different groups have very different ideas of how they should be approaching content. So that's obviously problem number one. I think the other really big problem is not just with the individuals in the community, but the environment of the community itself, right? So obviously the environment in this case is Guild Wars 2. So how Guild Wars 2 builds its systems and how players engage with those systems will define a lot of the players' behavior, right? So like you can kind of go the other way. It's like, if you change the in-game systems, if you like kind of change the environment that these players are in, then I think the players' behavior will naturally kind of adjust to that. So the most obvious example that I can think of is like even think about the recent LFG changes, right? They split instead of having like the raids like looking for group versus looking for more or something like that, and they changed it to experienced versus new players or something like that. That already kind of helped facilitate like the expectations going into these groups, because I think nobody in their right mind, unless they're actually just trolling with no intention like to actually listen to the other side, would join a group that's in the second tab for new players and then expect them to one shot the boss, right? That's just silly. That makes no sense, because there's a defined thing in the system that makes sure that those expectations are set, right? So I think the game could obviously do a lot more to provide those systems to players. Like, for example, the LFG could definitely be overhauled, right? And also, like, I think if the game had clear definitions of like what they would like the roles to be, because I remember in a previous balance patch stream, they specifically said they wanted like an offensive support, they wanted a defensive support, and then also some sort of damage dealing capability. It's a soft trinity, but it's still fairly defined, right? So if there was some sort of expectation in game that was already built off of this kind of soft trinity that they're already balancing around, I think that would also help set the expectation a lot. So yeah,
I feel like the game is still reaping the consequences of the preconceived notion of year one, where the game is like super role agnostic, and it seems like they're trying to move away from that. Like they're like defined roles are a thing now, but the systems in place right now aren't really like supporting that. And yes, we can have defined roles: offensive support, defensive support, healer, etc., etc. But if there's no way to know, or if there's no way to tell us how or what each player is doing, or if there's no way to teach the new players what these roles are, then how good is that going to do for the greater community, really? Like, I don't know. It's hard because there's a lot that needs to go into it, but I think we're definitely stepping in the right direction, where communication is getting better than at least last time or a few years ago, but there's still a long way to go, I feel.
Okay. I think you were gonna jump in there, Sneb. What were you gonna bring to the table there?
Look, I'm just gonna bite the bullet. I think the LFG system is so garbage. So just listen to this. I agree that the training expectation is there, and so if people join a training group and they get mad, it's kind of on them. The problem is that the reverse is not true. People that have no experience whatsoever join the experience tab constantly, and I don't even blame them, and here's why. It's silly to define it as training and experienced, because it's not that dichotomous. It's not like it's completely black and white. What it really is you have people that have literally never even opened the wiki page and probably need somebody to walk them through all of the mechanics. And then you have people that have done all of the preparation, know everything about the fight, but they just can't get a group because they don't have experience in the fight. Or you have people who have killed it one time, who don't really know all of the mechanics perfectly or want to play a new role or whatever. You might consider these people semi-experienced. You might consider them doing practice, but you wouldn't consider it just training, I don't think. I think training sort of, at least in the Guild Wars 2 community, it has this connotation that there's going to be a couple people in there that completely walk everyone through, when I don't think that that's a really good way to encourage people to learn how to do things, because it makes them reliant on a select group of people. It would be way better if there was a system where people could feel comfortable going in with a group of people who all don't know it super well, and could then just say, all right, we're going to practice this together and problem solve it. I think there's a huge gap for like this middle space. It's like you know everything perfectly or you know absolutely nothing. And so all of these people in the middle are just lost in the void.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with that. I mean, I'm not saying that LFG is perfect. I'm just saying what it is right now is a marginal step forward from what it used to be. And I'm actually going to use what I think is a fairly good system or a good example of LFG. And I actually think the fractal system is quite nice for that. But
Agreed.
fractals are also one of the only forms of, I think, vertical progression in the game, right? Through the agony system and needing to unlock the different levels. So the difference between people in 1 through 25 is vastly different from the people who are in 75 to 100, right? So it's like that is one of the few places where I feel like LFG is actually doing its job of giving people like, setting the correct expectations for people of different skill levels. But then, of course, like, that's not perfect either, because in the 75 to 100, then you have some people who are very, very good at it and, took the time leveling the fractal like entire ladder and actually learned how to do the fights. And then you have people who kind of just like did it every now and then and kind of very vaguely know the fights and that sort of thing. So obviously there's still like a lot more work that way. But I do think like that's a fairly intrinsic thing to video games, especially online video games. There's always going to be some sort of skill discrepancy. But I think if there were built in systems to reduce the likelihood of that happening, that would always be fantastic. Right. But I think, of course, it's always very difficult to expect the game to do things because they might just not have the developer bandwidth to do that. So obviously us, especially for like, community leaders or people who want to be community leaders, that's kind of on us to help find community driven solutions to that. So I think number one, like biggest thing for LFG, I don't know. It's hard to say because I'm probably a little bit biased because I'm a little spoiled by my community. But even just having like some sort of like copy pasta or something like that to set the expectation from the moment that people join the group, I think helps a lot. Obviously, not everyone's going to read the LFG title, not everybody is going to read chat, but I would say, the vast majority of people do, or if they don't, usually it's not due to maliciousness. So I something personally that I've been doing that I found actually a lot of success with is I have what I call a raid copy pasta, which basically includes like 2 to 3 pre-written lines on like the major mechanics for the fight. And before each fight, I just take like 10 seconds to paste it like super rapid fire, and then I trigger the ready check.
Spam
And then
check.
obviously not everybody is going to read that, right? I would guarantee like most people might read that and actually roll their eyes and think, haha, this commander is trying to like tell me what to do, whatever, and then they don't say anything. But I like to think that for some people, it might be helpful, right? To just get a quick refresher, have them like realize, oh, wait, okay, this group is kind of serious. They're actually like typing out everything. It's kind of like sets the bar before the fight even starts. So,
yeah, for sure. And even if like, and that can be intimidating for people, and that's okay. Like, I think that's another thing, that there's this weird tension where newer players, how do I put this, where people don't want to feel intimidated in groups, but on the other side, people, if you're not perfect, then you might as well not be in the group. And there's like nothing in the middle, where you can be in an experienced group and mess up, and that's okay. You can be in a training group and one shot it, and that's okay. And I think part of the whole communication thing is tempering expectations on both ends, in that you, like when Sneb said earlier, with if you made a training group and you're expecting to one shot things and you're getting upset, that's on you, right? But I think there also needs to be some consideration with actually doing runs and making mistakes and like being human, and not expecting this whole robotic type progression thing where if you mess up, people start leaving and things like that. Because I've definitely been in runs where we wipe one time in like a Aether Blade challenge mode or something, and then like 5 people leave, and it's just like, okay, how are we getting anything done when we're only getting one chance? You know what I mean? Communication is like pretty nuanced, especially in Guild Wars 2, and I think more as a community, more needs to be done to just understand where people are at, and doing what you have to do to get things done, but in a reasonable way.
Yeah.
I think
I was going to say that kind of on that point, I think what was just said there is really interesting, because I think that this really ties into the previous points that we were talking about with players. Oh, I actually think we were talking about this before we went live. Oh no, it's all merging. The timelines are merging. Oh my god. But we were at some point in the past, we were talking about how players kind of they clear content, but they're very reliant on a few individuals, right? Like a few people leading them. Like a few people who are in charge. And I actually think that the whole 5 people leaving thing is actually a direct consequence of that, right? I think that a lot of players are kind of confident enough to beat it, but the moment anything goes wrong, uh-oh, I don't know what to do anymore, right? I don't know how to resolve this, right? You know, it's difficult for a lot of players to go, okay, what should I do? What should I communicate to people? And I think a lot of players don't have the confidence to do that. And I think a really big part of the solution for making this issue better, and I would say this is true in every game mode actually. For example, I think if more people were confident to give advice in open world on how to approach content, you would never have you wouldn't have bosses fail, because obviously, look, we've all been there. We've seen the Octovine fails. It does happen sometimes. You know, Dragon's End, it does fail sometimes. I think if more players felt more comfortable to take the initiative, then that would actually get resolved somewhat significantly. And I think that really is a big part of what's lacking in the Guild Wars 2 community, is this type of communication. I don't think the information transfer is very good whatsoever. And I think this kind of speaks to the deeper issue that we're kind of probing at now, and I really want to talk about, is that I think the communities are incredibly isolated, right? Incredibly siloed. Like, we just don't ever interact with each other. And weirdly enough, that's kind of because the game makes it so you don't have to. Now we're getting into human nature, right? Like, yeah, a lot of these conversations, they are actually pretty difficult. Sometimes they get a little bit combative, right? And as a result of that, obviously people don't want to have them. I'm going to admit this, right? I'm one of those people. And I think Sneb is as well, right? Like, we've definitely had some pretty heated discussions. We've kind of gone into the lion's den a few times to kind of fight it out and try and communicate. And yeah, like, it's like, oh, well, you know, maybe I just won't do that anymore, right? Because, you know, it can get a little spicy sometimes, for sure. And as a result of that, you know, you just don't do that. And that means that over time, I think the Guild Wars 2 community has become more and more separated, where players of different types don't share ideas, don't talk to each other, don't communicate. And as a result of that, I think you end up, again, with exactly what we were describing here, with a lot of players kind of in the void zone, right? And there's nowhere to go, right? Because all the communities are completely opaque, right? It's very difficult to actually approach this stuff unless you already know, right? I think I spoke about this on stream a while ago. No, it was like a really good example. It's like, the barrier to entry in Guild Wars 2 is actually very low. Usually it's joining a Discord server. But the problem is that you can't climb over that barrier if you don't even know it's there, right? Like, this is the problem, right? It's an invisible barrier that you don't know exists. And there's like a whole world on the other side, but it's completely invisible to you. And I really think there needs to be a bridge. We need to construct a giant bridge. Otherwise, it's no good. And I really do think this is one of the core issues that the game faces now and has historically faced. And it's why I think a lot of players have difficulty with content like this. And this is not just PvE, by the way. I would say the exact same thing about PvP and about World versus World. World versus World actually does do this a little bit better, in my opinion, because the game is actually inherently social. And this is certainly linked to the LFG as well, but I really think that the game needs to enable social functionality far more, because World versus World actually has this. I would even say that to an extent, World vs. World is a bit of a model for this. Like, if you go to World vs. World, boom, you are going to see guild, you are going to encounter guilds. You are going to be invited to join the server community if you just, like, talk to people. It will happen. It will absolutely happen. And I think that needs to happen in other game modes too, because right now, there simply is no communication between new players and players who are already there, unless you really push for it, right? And like one side kind of aggressively chases after the other, right? Which, obviously is a little bit stressful sometimes.
A perfect example I just thought of as you were saying it, and it's going to sound very trivial to a lot of people, especially veteran players, but let's say you're jumping into Suwon and you start the last fight. How many people have you seen die to that first shockwave?
Yeah.
Quite a few, right?
A lot.
Now, really think about it. How many commanders have told people to jump that first shockwave?
Exactly.
Like, it sounds really trivial when you think about it, but that's the type of communication we're talking about. Because as trivial as it is, it does help.
Yep, I actually completely agree with that. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you're good. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I completely agree with that. I think it's like the shockwave, once you die to it once, you're probably not going to die to it again. But there's a lot of people kind of like snuck into, especially those big meta events, right? Because you have like 60, 70 people, sometimes people not even in squad, that sort of thing, that are doing it for the first time. And obviously, if it's their first time and they've never had exposure to this kind of mechanic before, then they're going to die to it, right? And then I think what really doesn't help is I think sometimes the narrative is like, oh, these people, like, they're just bad. They just like want us to fail, right? Like, that's why they're not moving. They're like malicious. They've unbound all of their WASD keys. They just want to be carried. But obviously that's not going to be the case, right? Like, for every one person that is maliciously doing that just to like, haha, I'm like going to try to grief this group as much as possible, you have like 10, 20 new players that, okay, now they've died to it once, they're never going to die to it again. But it's like Teapot said, there's this revolving conveyor belt of people. So there's always going to be new players that are experiencing it for the first time. So yeah, just wanted to like add that in there. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, somebody brought up Tequaddle when the revamp came out too. Like, nobody knew what the hell's going on. Like, yeah. But that's okay. It's the thing is, and I guess it's something to tell newer players who may be watching. It's okay to not know what you're doing, because all of us were at that point at some point, and I feel like it's a veteran job, especially if you have a commander tag, to help people with that, because people aren't going to want to do the content if you're not helping them with it, and two, they're not encouraged to do so.
I think kind of building off of that is that there's just not a very big population of people that can clear the content very smoothly, right? Because like Yorsu has, I mean, I don't know exact numbers. I'm just gonna put a label on it. I don't know, like 200, 300,000 players, active players right now or something like that. The raiding community in comparison, probably like people that consistently full clear wing 1 through 7 with CMs and like, they actually go into the LFG to like pug their clears and that sort of thing, maybe only number a couple thousand, like optimistically, like let's say 10 to 20,000. That means that 10 to 20,000 of 300,000 players is less than like, 5% of the total player base. So that just means that there's not a big selection of people to even pick from, right? It's like if there were just more fish in the sea, then you're going to have more people that, follow the natural bell curve, and like you're going to have more average players that, aren't particularly amazing, but also aren't particularly horrible either, right? And they would kind of fill up the LFG in that sense. But since the community is so small, I think we tend to see the people at the ends a lot more frequently. Right. So I think that's kind of like a big problem. It's like, how can you increase the rating population? But I think that's also another really big problem, because Gyoursu has historically been a very casual friendly game, right? It's like it has no subscription fee. It caters a lot to like older like individuals who have full-time jobs or families to take care of, and realistically can only spend like maybe a couple hours on the game every week. And like for those people, they just have no interest in this type of content, right? And I'm not even just saying just PvE, but also like Teapot said, PvP and World vs. World, where the population is even smaller, right? So it's like, then of course, like the bad apples are going to stand out significantly more. And I think part of the reason for that is that there's this idea that this instance content or competitive content is very scary, right? It's like you think just from the public perception of it, oh, if I go in there and I have no idea what I'm doing, I'm going to get ripped apart, right? And the unfortunate reality is that is actually exactly what happens. If you're a new player and you go in there and you have no idea what you're doing, you don't know what you don't know, and you go in there and you have no idea what all of these acronyms mean, like what is a quick, what is an alac, what is a DPS, what is a KP, what is a
It's a
LI
break
or whatever.
bar.
Yeah, it's like what's a break bar? Like you're not going to know any of that, and then you're probably going to get ripped to shreds when you join like an experience group looking for a certain amount of experience, and then they don't tell you anything. So it can be very scary. I like to think that most people would at least refer these new players, if they can tell that the actions were not malicious, would refer them like, hey, go check out these resources or something like that before kicking them. But I have also, even like within my own friend groups and stuff, where like I'm not even streaming and they ask me to come fill for them, and then they LFG and someone comes in, and actually I'm just gonna like use this one example because it happened very, very recently. But like basically we were doing demos and it was a normal demos. It wasn't CM or anything like that. And they asked people to join just for EXP, no kill proof pinging or something like that. And the comm told people, okay, we're going to sacrifice 25, right? So for those that don't know, sacrificing at 25 at demos means you send the person with the green circle off on their own, and then everybody else stays up at the top and burns the boss from 25% to 10%. But the thing is, if you don't know what sac 25 means, then you're just going to do it like you've probably done it before, which is just go to the green circles, right? So then what happens is you have a split. You have some people staying at the top, other people staying down at the bottom. And because everybody's split, you can't really do the strat very well. So the comm in this case, right, like kicked the person that didn't know how to do the sacrifice. And while they were kicking, I was trying to type out really quickly before they got the boot. Like sacrifice means that you do this just for like future reference and that sort of thing. But they got booted before I could finish typing that. But now the problem is that person, if they go on and they encounter that idea again, they're not going to have any idea how to do it, right? Because they were never told why they were kicked. And that then becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy, or this like constant cycle where like, okay, now they don't know that this is what they were supposed to do. They're going to join another EXP group, and then they're not going to know that mechanic. They're probably going to get booted again, and then they're just going to get more and more upset. Right. So it's like, I think it is a little bit on the responsibility for like the commanders or the more EXP people to like let these people know like what they did wrong. Right. Like, for example, in my case, I like whispered them after. I think I actually got blocked. Right. I whispered them as, hey, for future reference, sacrifice 25 means that you do something. And I tried to send them another link, or I like sent them one message. Right. But the text isn't big enough. And I wanted to add a second part. I was like, but no worries. Sorry that the comm kicked you. You did fine in the other phases. But when I tried to enter that second part, the more PMA part, it said that they were offline. So it was like, okay.
Yeah, it's like you're toxic. Yeah, you got blocked.
Yeah, but it's like, I don't know. I don't want to say that, like, I try to have a little bit of empathy, right? It's like, if I were in that person's situation, like, I don't know what they're going through, right? Like, maybe they just logged on, wanted a quick group, and now, like, you know, they got kicked, they have no reason, they're feeling defensive, and like, this person's coming over to tell them what they think. And then, of course, you know, they're going to dig in their heels a little bit, right? And in their case, you know what? Okay, blocking the person so you don't have to interact with them anymore, I'm okay with that, right? Because they didn't respond with negativity.
Really?
Yeah, no, honestly, okay. I know that sounds like really weird, but it's like, if people have different coping mechanisms, right? Like some people didn't grow up inside of an online community, right? And like some people, like, you know, you never know what people are going through. Maybe they just had a really rough day at work and they didn't have the mental bandwidth to deal with someone like potentially telling them what to do, right? And for those people, you know what? If you're in that situation and you block me because you feel like, you know what, I don't want to hear any more from this person, but I also don't want to give into the temptation to retaliate, and you just decide, okay, you know what, I'm not going to talk, I'm just going to move on with my life, I'm honestly okay with that. I think that is significantly better than the alternative that you hear a lot of people push, which is that they respond back, they call you negative, they call you toxic, they go to Reddit, they complain about it, they go to their friends, they complain about it. Oh my gosh, Gilris is full of these like elitist assholes. Like, this is far, far, far more like, I would prefer that way more. I don't know. Maybe that's a weird take, but
it's better. But I think it's an insanely, to me, that is like peak depression. Like that's such a pessimistic take, right?
I don't think so.
The idea that people can't conflict resolve kind of horrifies me.
I mean, sometimes people don't want to right now.
I think I agree with your central principle in that, you know, it's important to empathize with people. And sometimes people are having a really bad day and you just don't know their circumstance. And so don't be quick to judge, right? Try to do your best to not be quick to anger and be patient. However, I don't think that justifies that action, right? I think that if you are so sensitive that you are going to immediately leave when you encounter the first minuscule piece of opposition, that is also an unhealthy way to be. Obviously, it really it depends how bad it was, right? There's a lot of variables here, but it's important to recognize that you're going to encounter things that are hard, and sometimes you have to take a deep breath and go, okay, why did I get kicked? And you miss out opportunities for improvement and growth if you're quick to shun everyone after you encounter stuff like that. I know that's a really hard thing for people to realize, and I know that there's a lot of variables, because sometimes if people are being really rude to you, yeah, you should block them, of course. But if you get kicked from a group because you didn't know the mechanics, well, or you didn't understand the instructions, maybe instead of immediately getting really upset, take a deep breath and go, why the heck did this happen? And
but,
start
I think-
inquiring and asking questions.
Again, it's like-
Sorry.
You go ahead. You go ahead.
So two things to that. One, I think it may not be a minuscule thing to them. And two, if the person doing the kicking is doing it after the first time, it should apply to them as well.
Well, yeah, it applies to both. If I agree that if you're going to kick someone, you should always tell them why.
Yeah.
You should because otherwise you're just kind of being a jerk. Because now exactly what Emi said, right? That person goes, they don't know why they got kicked, and now they go out into the world and they're going to make the same mistake over and over and over again. It's immensely frustrating to not know how you can improve. That said, if you do encounter something like this and you are the one getting kicked, I know this sucks, but sometimes you have to be the one to be like, hey, why did I get kicked?
Yeah. I mean, I completely...
If they're not willing to tell you, then they're the a-hole. But if you go and you're like, hey, what's going on? You're able to solve problems there a little bit more. Is it ideal? Maybe not, but it's important that you try to overcome barriers as you achieve them. I think on both sides we have a problem here, right? On both sides we just immediately fold.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I think for most reasonable people, that would have been the case, right? Like, there's been many a time where, someone got kicked and I just joined a pug because I needed it clear. And even if the commander unjustly kicked them, I whisper them afterwards, tell them, hey, the reason why they kicked you is this. For future reference, do blah, 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 blah instead. And I'd say, maybe not 9 times out of 10, but a solid, 5 or 6 times out of 10, 50%, something like that. People respond and they're like, okay, thanks. I didn't know that. I'll do that from now on. It's like most people, the average peepo will do that. And they're happy to carry that knowledge forward. There's some people that don't need any guidance at all. There's some people that just don't want guidance. They're not mentally in the headspace to get that kind of guidance, which obviously you can then say, okay, then why are you playing an online game where you have to interact with other people? But that's not our job as it's not our job as players of the game to police that. It's not our job to decide whether or not someone should be playing the game or not. We kind of just have to play with the cards that we're given.
I agree.
So it's I think that's why it's I honestly, you know what? If I got my first part out where I told that person, hey, you should have done this thing, and then they blocked me right after, at least they read it, right? So hopefully in the future, if they encounter Sack 25 again.
Okay, I'm getting a little bit worried here. Okay, I'm starting to experience fear, terror, in fact. Because this. I think what's happening here is I think we're actually memeing ourselves to an extent, because we're talking about this super extreme case where someone messes up once and they get immediately kicked, and this really feeds into my opinion the absolute cataclysm of Guild Wars 2, which is perception and narratives are horrible in this game.
It is a little bit ridiculous. We're using the extreme cases to try to back up our points, but the reality is that those extreme cases happen very little. However, what I will say is that when Emi described things as it's 50-50 when something very minor goes bad and maybe somebody gets kicked, when you try to give people feedback because they don't know, it really is 50-50. And that puts a lot of pressure on the people that are giving feedback, because that means that half the time that they go and try to help someone, they get a really negative response to some extent. And that is probably enough for people to just not want to give the feedback.
Yeah,
I
I
think
mean, I
another.
completely agree.
Sorry. I think another thing is that, and this is like a really broad thing. What's the actual incentive of getting better in the game?
It's a good
I mean, I
question.
There's
think
very
that
little.
that is it's a really good question, but I think it goes into a completely different
Yeah.
topic. I'm happy
No,
to talk
well,
about
well,
it.
I asked
Well,
that
I actually don't. I
because
think that's really relevant.
I
think it's
asked that
super important.
because, like, and like I asked it because I don't like I like getting better at the game because it's fun. Like seeing numbers go up and stuff like that's cool. But like for an average player who may just be getting to raids or whatever, like they see the rewards and they're just like, okay, maybe I'll dip my feet in it, and they go have an experience like this or something similar, and it's just like I never want to do this again. It's not worth it. So if the incentive to like get better isn't there, then why would they ever want to communicate an effort to get better?
I think a
That's
lot of
super
that.
relevant. Yeah. Go ahead.
I was gonna say this leads more into the whole intrinsic versus extrinsic reward thing, right? It's like some people want to just get better because they want to feel this sense of progression, right? Whether it's like in-game progression through like goodies, right? It's like your gear, or whether it's skill progression, right? Just like getting good at the game. And then there's other people who would prefer like extrinsic rewards, right? So in a lot of cases, it's recognition from your peers, right? It's like getting recognition that you are indeed good at the game, right? So I think that's why I think it's like obviously the game can add more rewards into the game to I guess like add more extrinsic rewards to it, right? It's like let's say after you the raid bosses give more money when you give a drop, right? So if it gives more money, it's going to incentivize players to do the content more, and then if you do the content more, you're going to want to get good at it so that you can be better than the others or make sure that you don't wipe and that sort of thing. But I do also think there's a lot of intrinsic reward to it as well, right? Because MMOs are inherently social games. I think people hopefully play MMOs so that you can interact with other people and do events with other people, right? Whether it's through open world or whether it's through instance content. And I think when you're with other people, there's always, I feel like there's always this like kind of intrinsic motivation to at least, or this social pressure to perform at the same level that everybody else is performing at, right? Because otherwise you're going to get alienated, you're going to get isolated. And I think most people can agree that that doesn't feel very good, right? So it's like, in my experience, the people that play with more experienced players tend to naturally get more experience themselves without needing any extrinsic rewards, simply because they want to be as good at their peers. But then if you have like, a group that is like satisfied with just playing at a fairly low level, just, messing around, memeing, whatever it's called, then they don't feel that social pressure to get better. I don't know
I
if
think you've
that's
hit on something super important, and it's that there are different ways that people are motivated. And the problem is that there's really only a couple ways that you can exercise that in the game, if that makes sense. So
Right.
my question for you would be, all right, how do you know that someone is a good player?
This goes back to the game not making that clear.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
like
and
I
say-
agree with you, right? That there is some level of motivation in being a good player, but how do you know?
Right. And I bring this up as a decidedly average player, if not mediocre. Like I have touched on a few CMs. I'm not super hardcore because like this isn't my only game. But getting better in this game to me like is intrinsic because I love the feeling of improvement. It's great. It is so awesome to feel like I'm actually making progress, whether it's in my rotation or like progging a fight or whatnot. But there needs to be more than that. Not everybody plays for that reason, as we've all touched on. And like, I want more people to feel like they're actually getting something out of the time that they're putting in, regardless of if it's just that. Like having an intrinsic reward, having a feeling of improvement is not good enough.
Yeah. I mean, for some people, it's not good enough, right? That's why you always hear like the discussions around rewards, right? It's like you always there's this idea that if I'm putting in the effort, then I should be compensated for it, right? But I do genuinely think that if you put someone into an environment where everybody else is performing very well, and you can even not even like, let's say, not even directly measurable things, right? It's like their boon up time or DPS or something like that. If you play with a group, or if you are forced to play consistently with a group that is first pulling everything, right? Doing challenge modes with almost nobody dying, and like nobody really goes down. You don't really need to res, and people are handling mechanics and everything feels effortless. even if you don't know exactly what it is, I feel like you can kind of understand, wow, this group is very good at the content, right? It's like, even if you don't know exactly what measurable things they're doing to achieve that specific result, you can probably get a feel for it. And if you consistently play with those types of people, I would hope the average person, and again, not a malicious agent, you're going to think, okay, well, now I don't want to be dragging them down. I should probably try to get better, right? Or another alternative is, wow, okay, these guys are really good. I feel like I'm dragging them down, so I'm going to leave, right? But naturally, I feel like people will start kind of splitting into, I guess, groups that match their specific expectations, right? And I think if someone is forced, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I feel like I have to interject because I have a really good case study for this,
Ooh,
right?
okay,
I literally have this in Skein Gang, right? This happens all the time. I have 85 plus groups in there. And I have to say that they'll play with some really good players and they don't get better.
Really?
A lot of the
Yeah.
time. Yeah, I've had to kill multiple statics because a group will play for 4 months and they'll have a virtuoso who's doing less than 10k DPS, and then 5 other players have gone really hard and they're doing 30k. And
Yeah.
it's not that just that they're exposed to it, it's that they have absolutely no idea what any of that means or how to measure it, and it's not in the game. And it's really, really frustrating for teams because they'll literally they'll keep encouraging and saying, hey, like, you need to increase this, but there's this level of communication that's completely lost because they're essentially talking about abstract numbers that nobody understands. All they know is that in the game things are dying, and so they think that that means that they are good.
Yep.
And it's really, really impactful when you can go to these players and help empower them and show them what these things mean and what their impact actually is. But that just doesn't exist in the game. So unless you sit down and literally train them on how to use all these external resources, they don't get better because they don't think that they're bad.
I
And
mean, I
that
don't
sounds
disagree
really
with that,
harsh,
but
but
isn't that kind of on the responsibility of the group then? Because
no, but
communication,
they even go to the people and they'll say like, hey, like, your numbers are this, this, and this, but they just, it like doesn't click. They can
Yeah.
play with really good players. They can be exposed to all of this content. You can, but at the end of the day, it still might not work.
Like it
I
makes
guess.
it. Sorry, I make sure again, but it makes sense to us, right? I'll bring an example. Like for someone like me, I could not understand Catalyst. I tried, it was not clicking at all. I put in, God, I remember being up until like 6 in the morning trying to get that rotation down, and then going into like a random strike or whatever. Just couldn't get it. Is the rotation hard? Not really. Like, it's fine. Couldn't understand it. I couldn't do it, so I had a choice. Do I bring this to a raid group and try harder, or I can play a different class? Like, that's just how it was. And there's like sometimes you just do something and it doesn't work. Like, regardless of how people think how easy or hard it is, doesn't matter. Like, it just doesn't work for you. Like, people are different. People pick up on things differently. People learn things differently. But for some people, the bridge from something not clicking and figuring out how to make it click or how to like solve it isn't there. And it needs to, and sometimes if you're in a raid group and you have that type of person, is it on the group? Is it on the game? Is it on both? Is it something else? Like for us, it makes sense, but for a lot of players, it may not. And it's important to like understand that like we need to figure out a way to help bridge that gap.
Yeah, I think just to add a little bit more to this, it's because there are so many variables. I had a player in a static who was seriously underperforming for months, and I kept sending them resources. And I'm really someone who believes in like showing them the path, but not doing it for them. So I kept giving them resources. I explained how to do things, but I wasn't like, press 1, press 2. I was just showing them and exposing them to all these things. And they were still struggling, still struggling. Then one day, I realized that all of their settings were wrong. and that one of the reasons that they were struggling is because their field of view was really close. So they never dodged any mechanics because they didn't know they were happening unless someone explicitly called it out. They had melee attack assist on. They had all of these things that were preventing them from improving. And by that time, it was too late, right?
Yeah.
Like the team wanted them gone because they're like, this person is not improving, and there was no way to reconcile that.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, I think that this is a direct consequence of, funnily enough, like the way players actually engage with the game. Like, players go straight from, okay, I'm doing open world content, I'm doing the story, and they go, okay, now I'm going to go raid. And don't get me wrong, let's go. I'm down for that. I'm ready to go. Let's do it. But the problem with this is that this is very much a running before you can walk scenario. Like what you just talked about, Sneb, this is that actually might be one of the most important things we could possibly say here. And this is what I really think needs to happen with knowledge transfer. And this is in my opinion, this idea is really difficult to communicate without kind of sounding like a dickhead. Most players are not very good at piloting their character. Like, Emi, my PR manager, can, maybe sanitize what I said there a little bit in just a moment. But look, I always do. People who watch my stream will be like, oh, here he goes again. Game mechanics. The thing that really screws people over the most is the following things. They are keyboard turning. They skill click, right? Players also can't attack while moving. This is huge, by the way. Anyone who doesn't believe me, go and watch Open World. Or actually go in raids and watch this. Players cannot attack while moving. This is a catastrophe. They can't do more than one action simultaneously. And again, I need to phrase this a bit more politely. Players have not learned this skill. Players have not trained this skill. And they go, right, I'm going to go raid now. But the problem is they don't have... Rather, they haven't learned the kind of fundamental game mechanics to make this happen, right? Players have not...
let me help you.
Help me out. Help me out here.
You keep saying mechanics, but that's going to confuse people. What we're talking about is like physical dexterity with the keyboard and mouse.
No.
To an extent.
To an extent, yeah.
There's also in-game mechanics, but we need to separate that because I actually think that for a lot of people, this is their first MMO, or like some people, it might even be their first like PC game. For real. A lot of people are used to controllers. That's why a lot of people really like action cam. So if you put somebody that isn't very used to using WASD and their mouse in this game and you tell them that they need to just go and learn all these things, well, it's kind of like putting them in Calculus 1 before they've learned order of operations. It's really hard for them because they're going to make all of these silly mistakes that are a consequence of either not having the dexterity quite practiced or down with the keyboard and mouse and not understanding how it all works together, or maybe their settings are incorrect, or maybe they don't have the mechanical knowledge in the game. There's just so many variables here. It's hard to expect people to just go and learn this on the fly, especially if they're new to PC gaming. This happens all the time. The dexterity thing is a huge deal for a lot of players and is not talked about enough, frankly.
Sorry. You guys go ahead. Yeah.
Because I'm someone who much prefers lower APM. Not because I don't have the ability to do higher APM. Like, I play fighting games. Like, a lot of that's high APM, but I would like to continue playing video games 15, 20 years from now, like primarily. And having the ability to like do something lower APM, like for me, especially doing something lower APM allows me to focus on the game more. It's why I like started playing Power Mech, because I can, like, the rotation is extremely easy and I can just focus on the game. And this goes into like a balance thing, but having classes like that is super important for games like this. It's super important because not everybody is capable of having an esports APM, and that's okay. And those classes can be strong too. I know you guys talked about that like some weeks ago, but Like, having strong classes that don't require that much physical or fundamental effort is okay. Like, we need more of that. Not everybody needs to, you know, be a top tier hardcore gamer to like appreciate a game in its entirety. I feel, at least on a physical level.
Oh yeah, yeah. And to kind of follow on from that, like I completely agree with the statement, and also I think that's why it's really important to recognize that Guild Wars 2 has a weirdly high floor, right, to play the game effectively in this regard. You know, as I was saying, it is okay. It is non-trivial in Guild Wars 2 to control your character. In fact, I'm actually going to try and really put this in perspective here because, again, I really don't want to make it seem like I'm saying, oh, look at all these noobs who can't use a keyboard. No. This is something that takes a very long time to really refine to the high level. This is a skill, like character control. This is what separates, in my opinion, a good player from an amazing player. If you look at every single top PvPer, the one thing they'll have in common is they're extremely good at movement. Really good, right? Really good. If you look at really top raiders, there's one thing you'll see. They're all incredible. Their movements are fluid, incredibly dynamic and responsive, right?
No wasted movement.
Yeah, I'm not talking about, oh, you know, this is like level 1. No, this is not like a thing that you go, oh, level 1, and then I never practice it again. This is a skill that you refine if you want to. Like, again, I'm not saying, wow, this is so impossible. This is a skill that you refine continuously throughout your Guild Wars 2 career. Is this piloting of the character, right? Like controlling like movement, awareness, right? Attacking while moving, using skills in different and novel ways to solve problems, right? Like, this is what I mean when I talk about game mechanics, right? And yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe this is a bad term for it. Maybe we should say something like dexterity or something like that, like some other kind of descriptor for this, because that's a big part of communication. But yeah, in my opinion, this is something that I think really needs to be communicated better. I kind of stopped making raid guides a while ago. I actually regret doing that because I wish I had continued because I kind of like them. But I stopped doing it because I realized they were almost useless. Because I realized that like the guide is no good if you haven't kind of got that dexterity, if you haven't got that kind of practice on piloting your character. It's not actually going to help that many people because you kind of need to have all of your ducks in order, right, before you can actually get value out of using this thing. And I feel it's actually the case with a lot of guide content in the game, is that if you don't have kind of the baseline dexterity, the baseline game mechanics, then it's kind of really difficult to get anything done. And this is definitely a bit of a problem with Guild Wars 2, actually, by the way. It definitely is an issue. Because it's really hard to express this in some way. It's kind of difficult to say, oh, just move while attacking, right? Oh, just, you know, dodge, right? Just dodge, right? This is something that's, I think, extremely difficult to conceptualize and actually package as a guide, right? Or an idea. It's almost something that you just kind of have to just get in there and just see what happens and just mess around and press a bunch of buttons and kind of figure it out to an extent. Obviously, having guidance is really good on, oh, hey, this works really well, this doesn't work so well. But it's a really difficult one to conceptualize, I think. But yeah, that's my mechanics rant.
I'll never forget.
I wanted
what one of my friends told me when I told them I wanted to get into raiding. They told me, get to 25k DPS, then just look at your screen.
Yes.
And it was the best advice it's one of the best pieces of advice I've gotten in any game, any MMO I've played. Because I got to 25k and I just looked. I laser focused on the screen and just learned mechanics. And then eventually at 25 became 30. At 30 became 35. But it's sorry, go ahead.
I
keep on thinking that you're almost done talking, and then I jump in and then you keep going.
Yeah. Emi, over talking, interrupting guests on tea time. Oh dear. Oh dear.
I was gonna ask, how much of this is just the environment of Guild Wars 2, right? Like earlier, I was saying, like, you know, obviously there's the player and then the environment that they're in, and we've already seen Guild Wars 2 adding in environmental changes so that the players are kind of forced to play in a specific way, right? Like for example, the default keybind being for strafe instead of turn, right? Or having certain options being enabled or disabled. I think that's one of like the symptoms of the bigger problem, which is that I think if, let's say, field of view was default kind of zoomed out a little bit more, maybe not all the way out to complete max, but maybe a little bit more like higher, I think that would already kind of fix a lot of the problems without any community intervention, right? And kind of like same thing with the whole like melee attack assist or that sort of thing. I think they're good options to have, right? Especially for accessibility reasons. But if they were default turned off, I think it would just fix a lot of the problems we're talking about. And kind of like going on to like another example of this that is not just dexterity, but also back to the original topic, communication. One of the biggest things I wish that Gilbert 2 would do is default have the chat background be darkened, because right now when you first log into the game for the very first time ever, a fresh install, the chat box background is transparent. And what that means is that all of these itty bitty tiny little bits of text in the bottom left hand corner of your screen very easily blends in with the particle effects in like the rest of the game. So a lot of times what I've seen with new players is that they won't even realize that somebody is talking to them. Let's put aside all of like, the dexterity, the mechanics and everything. They don't even know that something is happening because someone's trying to talk to them and they don't realize that they're being talked to. So I think just adjusting a lot of the base settings in the game so that it's easier for communication to be received, I think is something that the game should do. But I don't think that's something that we as players can do for I guess for our other fellow players.
I agree with that. I also think then we have a responsibility as community leaders, content creators, people that run guilds, whatever it may be. We have a responsibility to encourage people to leave things like chat on. This is a good story. I actually got reported one time in Hardstuck because I had to kick a player from a normal mode strike run. They didn't have experience, and they asked if they could join us. And I was like, oh yeah, absolutely, hop in. So they jumped into the squad, and I had them in subgroup 1, and I was organizing people into 2 and 3. And so anyone that was left in subgroup 1, I went in squad chat and I said, hey, all right, you are DPS. Just acknowledge that you understand this by saying something in the chat, and then I'll move you down. And everyone, they said something, we moved everybody down. And then this person was left and they just didn't say anything. So I said, hey, are you there? Hey, are you there? And then, no response, no response. We started explaining that maybe they were typing in party chat, like, hey, don't, make sure you type /squad. We waited and I said, hey, let's give it a few minutes. So we all went on a bathroom break. We came back. It had been like 8 minutes or something. Okay. And I was like, okay, I guess they're just AFK because they hadn't really moved or anything either. So I kicked them. Then because I was streaming, someone immediately joined after because there's like a lineup of people to join. So we then go in there and we start the fight, and the person messages me and they're like, WTF, why did you kick me? And I was like, because you didn't respond. And the person then went and reported me and said that I was discriminating them based on their experience level. And I was like, no, I told them that they could play. They just didn't talk. They didn't say anything. You know what happened? They didn't have squad chat on. That was the problem. And I asked them, I was like, why are you playing without squad chat on? And they're like, because I don't need it. I'm like, well, turns out you do need it when you're going into instance content and stuff. They're like, oh, I just prefer that it's not cluttered. I think that's what they said. It was something like that, right? That they just weren't interested in seeing all the chat. And I said, okay, well, but this is how people organize, And it created this huge ordeal for kind of no reason, right? But we as content creators have a huge responsibility for saying things like, hey, if you go into instance content, you should have your chat enabled so that you can communicate because you're on a team now, you agreed to be with these 9 other people. Even if you're randomly thrown together, you are a team and you need to communicate to solve the obstacles in front of you. And if you don't, then it makes sense that people wouldn't want you on the team if you're not willing to talk.
Yeah. One small quality of life thing I think would be nice is when you join a squad, your chat defaults to squad chat. Like when you hit enter, it'll just be squad chat. Because how many times have you seen people join squads and they're still in party or they're still typing in party? Like little things like that help a lot.
Yeah,
like,
that one is
a long way.
That's a big trap too, actually, because people will see the messages appear and think they're communicating with the commander, but they aren't, right? Like, oh man, yeah, that one's really rough. That one's super rough because, of course, if the commander is in a different party to you, they won't see it, right? And
exactly.
You know, you could be responding to them,
really bad,
right? And they will not see your response. That's actually a really big trap. There are a few things like that kind of do just, you know, noobs kind of fall into them, and then it's like, oh well. I mean, that's just
they need to eliminate party. I'm biting the bullet. They need to eliminate party altogether. Everything needs to be a squad. And if you want to keep chat to a subgroup, they need to change it to /sub.
I mean, I think that would be really great because the functionality is already there in the game, right? Because you can already, there's like a trick where if you do it in the squad broadcast, you can actually broadcast to just specific subgroups using that /sub command. So that part is true. I was actually going to say another potential option, because I know this already exists in the game. If you join a squad by yourself and you type in squad chat, it'll show in red text that nobody can hear you, right? It'll that's just the default setting if you're by yourself and you type in squad chat. So I don't know, maybe something to implement is if you're typing in party chat, but your commander isn't in the same party as you, it could say the commander doesn't hear you. Right. I don't know if that's like a potential option, or maybe that's like not good because there are times where you don't want the commander to see it, right? When you're organizing,
the commander doesn't want to hear you.
Yeah. Yeah. The commander is ignoring you because you're not cool
They
enough.
Purposefully put you in a different subgroup.
Yeah. So I can see like drawbacks with that as well. But I mean, getting rid of the party system is a whole other discussion that I would actually love for them to do it, because imagine if you could use markers and fractals, man. That would be
that'd be so good.
I recently got into fractals, and people were like, "Okay, you're gonna mark what what thing you're going after," and I was like, "How? What do you mean?"
Alt click, and then that's a whole different system.
Yeah, it's an entirely. It just makes it unnecessarily complicated, in my opinion. But
yeah,
put markers in what's it called? Chaos EM.
Yeah.
For the north, south, east, west. Oh,
very good.
Please.
Very nice. Will be very, very nice indeed.
I think also another, while we're kind of on the topic of like the squad UI and everything, it would be really nice if I think that, you know how there's like the tiny little window where you can manage all of the party things. Something that happens all the time especially when I'm pugging, is when I trigger the ready check, someone, because they're in loading screen or something like that, they don't get the ready check pop up, right? And I tell them, okay, you can trigger it by pressing P and then pressing I am ready. And then they press P and they're like, I'm pressing P, but I don't see it. And then they realize, oh wait, I see it, because it's in the very bottom of their screen and they see like nothing there at all. So if the whole, like, I think just squad in general UI could be a lot better, that'd be great. Because another thing that I take advantage of a lot, but some people don't know about, is the squad message, right? Because it only pops up in chat the one time when you join into the group. But a lot of times, like, especially in Wolver's World that I've noticed, people will put like the Discord link in there. They'll like say like play specific classes or something like that, or they'll have like guild recruitment information and all that kind of stuff. And it just gets buried, right? Because if the chat is even remotely active when you join the squad, it's just gonna disappear in like 2 seconds. So it would, I don't know, just some sort of like squad, I don't know, squad panel UI overload, or I don't know, that would be great.
Yeah, speaking of ready checks, like every other, or at least most other MMOs that I've played that have ready checks typically leave like a little down ticking bar if you miss it, or there's a way to do that. We can have that. Like we can have that in Guild Wars. Like again, little things, like these small things that seem trivial that would like just make things so much easier for everybody.
Yeah, and well, I mean, honestly, like, I'd go one step further. We should just make at least some of the squad functionality should be baseline as well, so that everyone can use it. Because there is a weird thing. People don't like to join groups that don't have commander tags. That is true, right? I think
that's so true.
That is like very true. This is actually like very, very true. If your group, imagine being a pleb, non-300 gold enriched commander tag group. Pathetic, right? No, I mean, not actually. It's fine to do that, by the way. I'm just memeing. But the thing is, that is the way it's perceived, right? Which is definitely another bit of a problem. Like at least some of it, like probably should have.
Apples rise up.
Some kind of baseline functionality, right? Look at this. Matter says wing 1 looking for tag. That's a hard. Like Matter will never join that. right? Ever. Yeah. Honestly, knowing about it, she probably blocks them. Actually,
Okay,
if you have an LG like that. Yeah.
I will once again unleash. When I see those, I don't really want to join them either, because
Ooh.
what it's
Ooh.
no, but I don't think
Yeah.
anybody does, because essentially what it's saying is, I want to do this content, but I want someone else to do all the organization for me. Even if that's not what they mean, that's how I think it's
Wait,
perceived a lot of the time.
No, I see what you mean,
actually
Sneb.
agree with
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, right. Like, hey, Wing 1 looking for tag. I'm looking for a commander who's going to organize all the subgroups, tell everyone what to do, and organize the group, right? And put markers down. So the ask is, I want to do the content, but I don't really want to organize it. I just don't. Yeah, like that's what it's perceived as. I don't think I don't like hate them for doing that, because it makes sense, especially if you don't have a tag or whatever. But it's a tough ask for a lot of people, you know.
I think, okay, so a bit of a thought experiment here. So I have also seen groups kind of on the kind of the opposite, where the tag will tag up and they'll say like Wing 1 looking for more or
Ooh.
something like that. And then when you join, they're like, hey, I actually don't really know how to organize things. Can someone else organize it for me? People look on that a lot more favorably, right? Even though
Agreed. Yeah.
technically it's the same thing, right? Because it's the same, they're trying to like either maliciously or non-maliciously trying to push the responsibility onto other people, whether it's just because they're scared they're going to mess up or just because they don't want to do it, right? But I feel like in a lot of ways people view that as a lot more kindly, if only just because the tag is there. I think if that same person had done the
Agreed.
exact same thing without any tag whatsoever, people would perceive it in the complete opposite direction. So
Yeah.
that actually, to me, that seems more like it's less that people don't want to organize. It's more just like people don't want to be responsible for other people messing up. Right. And then I think the tag is kind of this symbol. It's like, okay, I already spent 300 gold on this and I'm trying to like put myself out there. People see that as like, oh, this person just needs our help. There's someone to be rescued. Whereas someone else is perceived as like this leecher that just wants like free money.
Yeah, I think when somebody joins my group and they go, hey, I have tag, but to be honest, I'm not like super experienced with leading this. I just go, hey, make me lieutenant and I'll support you and you can learn how to do this so that the next time you're a little bit more confident, but we're doing this together. When somebody says looking for tag, they're saying, I want somebody else to do it. I do not really want to, at least that's how I perceive it, right? Even if that's not how they mean it, I think it's just because it's so short. There's not a lot of descriptors there, so assumptions are made.
I've had one bad experience with exactly what you're talking about, Sneb, and I set up a Cold War to just finish out my week. And I had a lieutenant set up because this was when I was like still returning to the game, brand new, et cetera, et cetera. And the lieutenant was like, sure, I'll set things up. And they accidentally had two alacrities in one party. And I didn't realize it. So we just went anyway. And the moment we finished, I got flamed pretty hard. And I could take a little flaming, but it was they said it wasn't the lieutenant, it was somebody else who said, please learn to set up parties, commander, you suck at this, whatever, and just left. I said, well, first of all, it wasn't my fault.
To encourage people to tag up.
Right? I don't mind. I could take a hit. It's whatever. But
I think you should mind. Frankly, I think when people do that, they're doing like a huge disservice to the game, right? When they go and somebody's learning how to command and they're open about it, I think that's the key, right? If you go and you're saying, hey, just so everybody knows, still learning this, would appreciate some help, but I've got somebody supporting me and whatever.
Yeah.
And they still flame you out, like they are a complete a-hole. Like when you do that, it absolutely destroys people's desire to lead stuff, and we need more leaders.
Yeah, it was more of a personal thing that I don't mind it, but you're absolutely right in that shouldn't be happening at all. Because what if somebody doesn't take that as well as I did and just never wants to command anything in it again, or worse, doesn't want to do group content again? Stuff like that matters a lot, and even
I
even
remove
so,
people from the group if they pick on anyone. Like I have. Maybe I have too high of standards, but one time somebody came into my group and they started flaming out somebody who was helping. And I was like, you need to stop now. And then they doubled down and I kicked them. And then they're like, why did you kick me? And I was like, why do you think I kicked you? I kicked you because you were immediately combative.
Yeah.
There's no reason to be that way. It just makes everyone have a bad time. And that's what gives instance content a bad reputation.
I was more annoyed that they flamed me over a Cold War. Like, come on, it's not that big.
Yeah, there's also that. It's like, okay.
Like, I'm sorry, jeez. Sorry, we got one less chest.
There's something that I kind of want to move on to, and in my opinion, this is kind of like the second really major topic of what we're getting into here. It's narratives and perceptions and how to challenge them. Because that you just told that story there, and that is bad. That is thumbs down, not good. Don't flame people who are stepping up to the plate and kind of doing what needs to be done. But there is something, and I don't think this is Guild Wars 2. I think this is actually just like a human thing, to be honest, is that a few people in the chat, in fact, responded to that story and said, this is why I never tag. This is why I will never tag. And I think that this kind of perception and narrative is actually extremely damaging to the game. In my opinion, the perception around instance content and leadership and absolutely any area of the quote-unquote hardcore scene is ludicrously warped. It is completely disconnected from reality. People view that all of the, look, people think Sneb is toxic. Unironically, okay? This is a lunatic statement, in my opinion. Like, genuinely an insane statement. But, there are people who look at the raid community and go, oh yeah, the raid community is toxic, right? Oh, all these really good players, they're unbelievably toxic. And I understand how people get this perception, right? Because honestly, if you go into content that has a fail state, any fail state, you are going to encounter negative experiences. And it's very easy to take that negative experience and go like, oh wow, this is horrible. These people are awful. Like, what the hell? Like, what the hell's going on here? And to kind of cut to the chase, and honestly, I want to open this up because I actually don't know the answer to this. Outside of just overwhelming it with just pure positivity, right? And you just have to completely just unleash a tsunami of goodness. I find it really difficult to challenge these narratives that are false, because basically what you're doing is I'm saying your personal experience is irrelevant and not representative. And I don't think there's any way to make that like an easy pill to swallow, right?
Well, because
I can say a statement like, yeah, you can definitely have negative experiences in raids, but actually that's the vast minority, right? The vast majority, absolute dominating majority is incredibly wholesome and positive. You'll actually find some of the most helpful and most supportive players in the raid training guilds, in the raid community, and so on. There are hundreds of people doing incredible work in raids. And you know what? It's the same in PvP. It's the same in World versus World, actually. There are some incredibly cozy communities in those game modes. Some really social people who will absolutely help you, get your feet on the ladder, climbing the rungs of greatness in those game modes too. But the problem is that I completely get it why people don't respond well to saying that, right? Because again, you're essentially invalidating someone's experience by doing that. You're saying, well, that doesn't matter actually. But it's really difficult to actually communicate this, in my opinion, in an effective way.
I have a semi-hot take.
Sorry, go ahead.
I have a semi-hot take. It's two-layered. The first one, I think the game is still suffering from the effect that Heart of Thorn's release had on the game, because it stripped away the agnosticism that the game had back then, where you could do anything and be effective and all of that. And Heart of Thorns took that away from a lot of players. It took that completely away from a lot of players, because now...
You really think that's still having an effect? I mean, that's like 7 years ago plus, right?
I think so, because it's still carried throughout the rest of the expansions, and it's still enforced to this day, especially since the game, again, going back to the game not telling you how to do any of this. So if you're a player going in and you see this game is like, wow, I have all of this stuff at my disposal, I can do anything, and then all of a sudden you're going to content and you're like, no, you can't. That's like really discouraging. And the reason for that is because of Hearthstone's release, and to a much lesser extent Path of Fire. But do I think?
I don't know if
sorry.
I quite understand. What do you mean? Can you maybe explain this a different way? I'm not quite following.
So when the game was young, it was perceived as this game that was away from the Holy Trinity, away from having these defined roles because you could do anything. But now, these days, that's not particularly true. And a lot of players who came into the game wanting this freedom of doing whatever they want don't get to do that in structured content.
I think so. I think I personally disagree with that a little bit. I don't know if the game was ever intended to be you can do whatever you want to do, and then like it's still like good, right? I feel like actually the developers have recently taken this stance where it's like there are wrong decisions, right? It's like you're not supposed to take a trait that is like let's say giving you increased minion damage on when the rest of your gear the rest of your gear and build has nothing to do with that, right? Like there are obviously some choices that are better or worse than others. I think a lot of people tend to like kind of misconstrue that idea and interpret it as, oh, I can just run whatever build I want, and the game is like supposed to let me do that. Versus what I think the game meant is that you have significantly more freedom with your build in different circumstances, right? Like I'll use Mesmer as an example because I play Mesmer all the time, but like the build that you play for Mesmer is wildly different if you're playing it in open world versus if you're playing it in Wing 1. And it's very different if you're playing it in Wing 1 versus Wing 5 and like that sort of thing. And there's a lot of like flexibility in there that you can take that will give you like, the most reward for whatever situation that you find yourself in. And I think a lot of times when people, I think especially like new players that come into this thinking, oh, you can just do whatever you want and you'll be like, okay, I feel like that's just not true, right? Or it's like it's a bad faith interpretation of what the game really meant to say.
That's fair.
So,
yeah, that's super fair.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of it's also like open world is a big issue with that too, because you really don't need anything for. Well, I shouldn't say that because chat will come down my throat. But
no, it's just kind of true though. Like open world is designed very intentionally for 99% to be very accessible, and I think that's quite a positive thing in many regards, right?
Agreed. Yeah,
so you can kind of play whatever you want and get away with it, and I think that's probably fine.
Maybe that's where I'm tripped up, right? Because it could be open world, giving that perception more than anything. I'm not sure.
Yeah, open world gives the perception that your actions have little consequence, right? Your choices don't mean very much. This is problematic for players who really enjoy, depth, because when they first start playing the game, they don't see any reason, like they just don't see any consequence to choosing one thing over the other. It doesn't feel like it's really that impactful. But for players who aren't super engaged in that, they're going to go for a very long time without ever hitting any kind of wall. And then when they do hit a wall, it feels much larger than it actually ought to be because they're going 90 degrees straight up now, trying to figure it out.
Right. Yeah, I think that's where I think that's where my thinking should have been, is the open world gives that perception where in instance content it's nothing like that at all. Yeah.
This is kind of a super interesting conversation because, in my opinion, this is actually really complicated because the thing is that you can basically play any build you want and it will kind of work. The problem is that some things work better than others, and this has kind of always been the case. It's just that kind of content has got a bit harder, right, to an extent, and therefore it matters more now. And like, could you go into raids? Well, actually, no. Here's like the really, really obvious example, right? If you wanted to, you could clear all raids in the game with 6 people. You can do that. So in other words, in every single raid group, there is room for 4 people who do 0 DPS, 0 healing, 0 boons, 0 anything, right? But the thing is that obviously it's going to be way harder to do that than taking 10. And I would actually liken this to builds as well. if you take 10 really awesome, like boom, big builds, big blasting, right, super OP, mega busted, then this is obviously a much better strategy than taking 10 builds that have random gear, random traits, and random stuff. Can you actually clear raids with 10 random builds? Absolutely. But the thing is, you're going to have to play way better, right, to do this. I feel like I'm expressing this very, very poorly, but it's like, you know, you could, if you're going to run 100 meters, right, you know, you could... There's a whole bunch of different ways you could do this. You could run backwards, you could run forwards, you could run sideways. But one of those is better than the other, right? Like, and is it possible to run 100 meters backwards? Absolutely. You can do this. You can do it. However, running forwards is probably a hell of a lot better, right? And a hell of a lot easier to make it. Right? You know, along that 100 meters, you'll probably have a better time. You're probably not going to run into stuff, right? You might not fall over, right? And this is the same thing that's happening with builds. It's, if you choose to use a really good strategy, that makes the content easier. If you choose a less effective strategy, that makes the content far harder, and it's going to require essentially more effort on you, right? And this is something that, is always really interesting to me when people bring up stuff like skill clicking. Because it's like, you can clear all content in the game with skill clicking. That is unequivocally true. You can probably even get to a decent PvP rank, in fact, by skill clicking. However, it is way harder to do that than if you use a conventional control scheme. Right? And I think this is where it gets incredibly muddy, and this entire dialogue, the entire like play how you want meme, I think it really emerged from this, is that people think that because you can do something, that it's equal to everything else. And that's regrettably not how it works.
So here's a question. How do we as a community set the line for what's good enough in terms of a build?
Okay, that's
that's the killer.
Should I take a swing at this one?
That's the killer. You know, because you know what? I'm gonna say it. I think that's It's an amazing question. Number one,
because it's totally subjective,
and it's also insanely hard. It's really hard to answer that question, and that's a problem, right? Because and this is like a Guild Wars 2 thing, and this is definitely where that kind of role agnosticism really does bite the game in the ass. I think this is pretty easy to define in other games, right? I imagine
because like there's like this big issue, right? It might be Dark Lowry time. There's like this big issue where if the build is not literally the best build, it sucks. And this obviously that's not true. Like, just because a Catalyst is doing 45k or however much it was doing doesn't mean your 38k build is terrible. Like, it's just not true.
I'm going to push back on that, because I don't think that that's true for the majority of players. Like, maybe in this very small minority of like Reddit that like is like, you know, huffing the DPS benchmark copium, all of that kind of stuff. I think the vast majority of people, if you pug, if you look in statics, if you know, even in like some of the more inventive like HTCM runs and stuff, as long as you can prove that the build works and you're doing whatever people have defined your role to be, I think most people are okay with that. Like, speaking from personal experience, like even in my last group with HTCM prog and stuff, this was right after all of the Mechanist nerfs, so Power Mechanist was still fairly weak, but we were still able to clear the content with a fair amount of ease because the people piloting that build were doing their job. I think a lot of the times when people are worried about like these benchmarks and everything is that there's this worry that because you're playing this lower performing build, it's like what Teapot said, you have to add a lot of personal gameplay skill to make up for that. But if you're able to play that build well, nobody's going to give you any crap for it. But then the problem comes is if you're playing a build that's not very good, and theoretically it could be good, but you're not doing it very well, then it's kind of a double whammy, right? So I feel like it's kind of, again, it's a symptom of a bigger problem, which is just that most people playing like, you know, these different builds, whether it's a good build or a bad build, are just not playing them very well.
I'm gonna.
That's true.
Oh yeah, sorry. Go ahead. I was just gonna quickly counter. Yeah, but go ahead.
No, sorry, because I have like 4 thoughts and I probably won't get them all out.
Yeah. Go.
I agree with you 100%, Emi. Yeah. I think a lot of it is the perception of it, though. right? Because like Virtuoso is broken, but if Virtuoso is ridiculous, like oh my god, oh I'm sorry, yeah. But like because people don't see Virtuoso doing 40 plus K, or a better example, people don't see Mechanist doing as much as Virtuoso. They think Mechanist is bad, but like the perception of it matters way more. I'm never gonna not take a Mechanist in a group, like because chances are, it's really hard to be bad on Mechanist compared to a lot of other DPS classes. So yeah, I'll take a Mechanist any day, but the perception of it, because Mechanist isn't on Snowcurl's meta build, it must suck, right? Like it's things like that matter so much when it comes to like perceived builds. And like, yes, Emi is 100% right. If you're taking a build that may not be considered as good and you're not doing good with it, you're just not going to do well. Like, and you probably got to work on it. Yeah. But sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so I agree with this. I do think especially the people who have a lot of influence in the community, so Snowcrows, Hardstuck, Discretize, all these big, like, big guilds and websites that are able to kind of control the narrative a lot. Yes, I completely agree. I think they control the perception of these builds a lot. But I think just kind of using your example again, I don't think there's many people who actually think that Mechanist is bad. Like, I don't think they think it's trash. I think absolutely there's this idea that certain builds are better than others and that they would highly prefer these builds. But I think the idea that people are saying certain builds are just trash, garbage tier, whatever it's called, I think that's very rare, or usually like an overstatement or an exaggeration. I think most people can acknowledge, like, it's like Mechanist is obviously not performing as well as it used to be, but it's still a very strong build. Same to actually, moving away from Mechanist, let's say like low intensity builds, right? It's like most people acknowledge, like, low intensity builds, they're obviously not the best option, but they're also not trash builds either, right? They're just kind of like floating again in that void in the center. And I think, I guess it's like, in a way, kind of saying that the perception of these builds is trash is going to turn it into a self-fulfilling prophecy, because then more people are going to say it. So then more people are going to believe it. Right.
Right. So this brings me back to the original question. What's the line?
Yeah, I guess it's just like, I guess that's a different question. What I was more of trying to get is, I don't think there's too many people who are pushing this negative perception. I think there's a lot of very loud minority people that are saying this, but the vast majority of players don't even hear these loud minority because they're staying in these very niche corners.
That's fair.
I don't know if this is like correct or not, but again, it's just in my experience, I don't think I've ever seen someone say Virtuoso is bad or Mechanist is bad, or even like, I see people memeing about Scourge. I actually don't even see many people saying that Scourge is bad nowadays.
Scourge is ridiculous.
I think that
Scourge is bad.
Right? Yeah, like, I think this is really subtle. I was gonna like slightly push back, but then you guys already did the conversation, so I can't do that anymore. But yeah, I think it's a really, really big problem. It's not that people think that it's bad. It's just that things snowball and end up incredibly weird. I think players don't have easy ways to evaluate what is good and what is bad other than DPS. So they basically only look at that. And I think you end up in these situations where players go, well, hang on a minute, nobody's playing Scourge anymore. That means it must be terrible, right? Like, that's the kind of reasoning that happens. I think this is really true of stuff like Spectre and Scrapper, actually. Is that
my love, Scrapper.
These two builds are actually really, really strong. It's just that not many people play them, and I think a big part of that is actually because they're not that common. You see a fair bit of Scrappers in open world, actually, funny enough. But it's you don't see it, and therefore you don't see it. People don't play it because people don't play it. And I actually do think that there is this perception around, particularly 10-player content, squad content, that if you play here, you're almost like you're forced to play the meta builds, like the best possible builds out there.
It's so weird to me because, like, yes, as you said, there's way too much emphasis on DPS. Unless you're literally doing speedrunning, I think there's way too much emphasis, especially when your group needs a specific thing. Like, there's so many players that I know that refuse to change their utility skills for something that they may need for that fight. whether it's because of the encounter or because the group may need that specific thing. Like, people just don't do it. But the exception is Bone Skinner. For some reason, people remember that Scourge exists when Bone Skinner is around. It's just so weird. Like, so you understand that
I have to just say it.
Go for it.
It's because people don't read their skills. They don't know what they do.
I didn't want to say it.
I say this in not like a super malicious way, but the reality is that a lot of people don't know what all of their skills do and how they interact with the mechanics around them. The number of times where I've gone into something like Bone Skinner and we don't break the first CC bar.
Oh my god, yes.
It's really high.
It's such a pain.
Really high. And the reason is because people just assume that everyone else will do it. Again, there's no transparency in the group, so you don't really know what your CC capabilities even are. So everyone's like, well, what if I just greed out a little bit more DPS and I don't bring this skill? Or you have a newer player that's like, I don't even really know what half of these skills do. I just pulled this off of Snow Crows and I kind of know my rotation, so I don't really want to adjust anything for fear of breaking it. So you have all of these things all happening at once, and what that turns into is the Bone Skinner never having its Defiance bar broken.
Yep.
But there's nothing that like forces you to read and engage with many of your skills, and that's fine, but the consequence is, well, everybody just kind of goes in and they don't adapt as much because they don't understand how they would even do that. Yeah. It's not a knock on players, really. I think that it's just an education thing. If you told players that, hey, if you bring this skill on this boss, your win rate will go up, people will be like, all right. You know, most would. Right. Some would say that's toxic and that they should be allowed to do whatever role playing they want. But I think most people would say, hey, if it's going to help the team, let's do it. But they just don't have that awareness or knowledge yet. It's not something that's really well conveyed across the community.
Yeah. In normal, like, caning Overlook daily, I'll take both my reses on Scrapper. Like, because in a pug group, who knows what the hell is going to happen? And the goal is to clear the content. And if you're trying to clear the content, you can afford to take a little hit on the DPS if it means keeping the group alive. If it means providing what they need. If you need projectile reflect, take projectile reflect. There's a lot of people that don't know that Bone Skinner has ads that throw projectiles at you. Like, yeah. And it's just so weird to me. Like, but Sneb said what I couldn't.
I want to slightly redirect it to what Emi was saying, because I think that was really central to the issue here. Is that it's the problem here is not the fact of the matter, right? Because this is where things get complicated and difficult to deal with, in my opinion. And this was one of the things that I think is really hard to deal with. We talked about this earlier, is perception. How do you actually challenge perceptions? Are you actually going to get kicked for running Heal Tempest in raids? Absolutely not. You're talking like 1 in 1,000 you might get kicked because some like dumbass thinks that Heal Tempest is like completely unplayable, right? But if you read about it on social media, if you look at YouTube comment sections, if you look at the way people talk about it in game, you could easily come to the conclusion that it's unplayable. This is the problem. This is what I really don't like, and that is true of a lot of builds. Right. Okay.
I was going to say Heal Tempest might be a bad example because people like the Elementalist complaining is just way higher than both.
Yeah. But, you know, I think this really is true. And this is, you know, where, look, I'm agreeing with both of you. I love this. Oh, yeah, diplomacy tea time. I don't know what the, you know, it's wholesome tea time. Yeah. It's hard to deal with, because I can just say, oh, you aren't going to get kicked for playing Elementalist. But I feel like that's not good enough. I feel like I'm missing something. Like, what's the extra thing that I need to say or express to do it? I guess it just has to be, I need to play Tempest, right? I'm pretty sure that is actually what's missing. You know, everyone here needs to hit the live stream and start playing some weird builds.
Okay, actually,
can I like the right thing though?
I started playing Bolt to the Heart Weaver because I used to play it a lot in like Fractals back when I like did some Fractal speedrunning stuff, and I was very pleasantly surprised at how much damage it did. I don't know. Actually, okay, it was twofold. One is that the damage felt a lot better than what it used to be, because I did try to play Weaver back in the day, but this was before all of like the buffs to like the base weapons and the core traits and all that stuff. So it was pretty bad back in the day, but now it's like it's fairly good. but I just never got around to like trying it out. And then someone told me apparently Bolt to the Heart has it has a perfect loop rotation now. And I remember this was my biggest gripes with the build when it first came out, is that it just, there were small variations. You had to wait like an extra couple of seconds here or there because it didn't loop perfectly. But they changed the cooldown on one of the skills, so it actually feels really good now. Anyways, just complete derailment. Just wanted to throw that out there. Bolt to the Heart Weaver is actually very good right now. So that's just like number one. I think number two is that I only recently started using Guild Wars 2 Wingman and stuff. And I actually think that right now, if you look at the stats, even if they are obviously very biased stats, right, because they're not built into the game, it's just what people have uploaded, this distribution across all of the builds is significantly more even now than it was 3 months ago when Mechanist was like the OP class, right? So I think in a lot of ways, I'm going to kind of push back on what you said, where it's like, it's this kind of like people don't play these classes. I actually think that people do. Maybe, I don't know if this is different on EU or not, but like every other group that I have, especially when I'm pugging like off stream and stuff, has quickness scrappers. We have like, the different alacrity options. I even saw an alacrity Spectre like not too long ago. It's like, I actually do think that they are getting a fair amount of play. Like obviously in some encounters more so than others, because whenever I pug Kining Overlook, normal, for example, usually I have 2 Alacrity Specters because I think they realize like how strong Alacrity Spectre is in that fight. And then obviously then Harvest Temple is kind of the opposite. I never see Alacrity Specters in there because people still think that the Venoms are bugged. So I do think that obviously there is a little bit of public perception kind of warping what people will and won't play in certain encounters, but it's pretty good right now. I think the only build, because I've been keeping track of it a little bit, that I haven't seen is Quickness Harbinger. I think that's the only build that I haven't seen get any love in like the past 3 to 4 months.
I've seen none. I've had none in my
It's
groups.
uncommon. It's uncommon. Okay, I need to split the hair even further then. I've got to split the hair even further here. Because I agree with you, Emi, 100% there, I think. However, that, in my opinion, is not actually the issue. We've got to go deeper. We've got to go one layer.
I want to talk. I've got something important. Yes, I'm really bothered by this.
Okay, wait.
Okay, so you're talking before about communicating and perceptions and stuff. You said that, how do you tell someone that essentially their worry is irrelevant? And I want to combat that, because I actually think that that's the problem. The only thing that matters is their perception.
Yes.
Nothing else matters. So if you tell them that their perception is irrelevant, all that does is feed their perception. It doesn't solve the problem. The only thing you can do is to try to help them change their mind. And the only way that you're going to do that is continually give them positive experiences.
Yeah.
That's the only thing you can do, because otherwise they're going to just keep doubling down. With regards to your elementalist stuff, I just think it's, if you go and you play Heal Tempest, you have a problem, because that build is actually a lot harder to play than some of the alternatives, in my opinion. And that doesn't mean it's bad. It's actually quite a good build. It's completed the hardest content in the game. But if you go and say, hey, yeah, everybody, this is really good, well, this means that everybody's going to go and they're going to try to play it and they're going to hit this wall. So I think that you also have a duty to set people's expectations. So you should say things like, hey, this is a really good build. It's really fun, but there's a bit of a higher learning curve. If you just go and play it and you don't give any warning, you're going to have all of these people go into groups and play the build really poorly, which actually feeds the negative perception that it's a bad build. And that's the big issue. You don't want people going and playing these actually pretty good builds very poorly, because then all that does is create this sort of stereotype against that build. Yeah.
I thought that was assumed, that we would tell people that, hey, this build is good, but X or but Y.
Actually, it's not assumed, because
yeah,
there are times when there are certain builds that float around the community, and they're like cool, quirky builds, but they're either not very good builds, or the build is so incredibly hard to play, or it doesn't really fit into the standard team composition and would require significant alterations in your team composition. Those builds float around, people start playing them. Now you have no protection in your subgroup, or now your quickness is lacking, or you don't really have a great burst heal, or whatever it is. Now this is happening, and there's confusion and malice in groups.
I think that again, I'm gonna push back on this. I think that usually happens though when there's not enough population. I think like an example that I'm gonna use is Heal Firebrand, because Heal Firebrand, most everyone can agree it's a fairly face roll build, right? Like you can kind of just like do whatever you want on it. But every now and then you have like a Firebrand that wanders into your group that doesn't have protection upside, or I guess this isn't true anymore because the 6th skill gives protection. But back in the day, if you wanted to give protection, you needed the trait that puts the protection symbol on the ground. You would have like, no protection in the group. You would have almost no healing because they didn't understand signature, because that's what Snooker's pushed. And then they wouldn't understand like how to position to give quickness. Basically all of these like small nuances in the build, right? But those people were kind of overlooked because the vast majority of people didn't know how to play it. So I would actually argue that if more people just play the build, because I would say the average person will probably at least understand where you're getting your alacrity from, right? Like your overload. They might not know all of the specific skills in every single attunement, that sort of thing, but most people will be able to do their job to some sort of satisfactory degree. If there's just more people, then you're just going to have a bigger like population and a net to catch these people. And I think it's like, I don't know, maybe spicy take. I don't think Elementals is that hard to play at all.
Oh, I disagree. I
Going back to my Catalyst
it's
flashbacks.
hard. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, obviously different builds with like, it's like you can also argue that a very specific niche build for like Guardian, which is known as being one of the easier classes, is also going to be very difficult. But Elementalist as a concept, especially Heal Tempest, where you don't need to worry about like dual wielding things or that sort of thing, I think it's a fairly straightforward build. Like, I don't know. I think the idea
it's
that
deceptive. That's the problem.
You know
actually.
what? I think people can do it. I'm joining Team Emi. I'm teaming up. I'm now 2v1ing
I have no
Sneb.
doubt that people can do this.
I'm sorry, Sneb. I'm Team Emi as well.
You have to explain some very key things about that build and constantly reinforce it because it's different than other healers. Heal mech, you press button, alacrity happens. Druid, you press button, alacrity happens. Revenant, you press button, alacrity happens. Tempest, you press button, you have like 2 seconds where you cannot cancel that skill or alacrity does not happen. And
okay, I will say that part is unfortunate. I think they should have made
that's where I'm going. It's much more complicated to give the boons well and heal at the same time because you have to time this very specifically. And a lot of people struggle with that because the other builds that do the same thing, they don't have to worry about that in the same way. Like not at all.
I get what Sneb is saying.
I tried playing Heal Alac Tempest and I loved it when, it's been forever now, but back when it was 10-person boons, I loved that build. The problem now, though, is the way that it gives alacrity, it sort of forces you to have a certain cadence with your overloads. And if you don't do the cadence correctly and you need to cancel one to, say, heal someone in your group because of the way that the boss functions, you've now lost out on alacrity. Like, I always tell people if they want to play that build, they should always run a Herald because it'll give them a lot more leeway to make mistakes with alacrity generation.
I think that's true to a certain degree, but I'm pretty sure I've crunched the numbers. If you have 100% boon duration, you only need 2 overloads to keep up 100% alacrity. And even if you're assuming like, you're like okay at the class and you're like attuning off cooldown and stuff, you can fit 3 to 3.5 overloads in a single.
Gamers, we've gone unhinged here. In my opinion, we've gone unhinged. Again. Like no, it's because here's the problem. We're doing the thing again. We need to stop doing the thing. Gamers, it's okay if it isn't perfect. Raids are very doable if people just play kind of okay. You don't have to be an Omega Hyper God Gamer X Lord Slayer Master X to beat this content, right? Like, we're doing the thing where we make the perception worse. We're acting like if you cancel even a single overload, Veil Guardian will punch you into orbit. No,
okay,
right?
So hold on.
When you're playing a support build, it just is. It's way more important that you have reasonable alacrity. It's way more important that you can heal without interrupting all of your other stuff. It just is more important. And so it's important to tell people, hey, if you're going into raids for the first time and you're playing Heal Tempest, it's going to be way harder because you have to learn all of the mechanics and juggle this timing.
I-
Now that doesn't mean you have to be perfect to get the kill, but you're gonna climb a way bigger hill. And I think it's important to give people the facts when it comes to that stuff, rather than have them just jump in and find out and be frustrated with their build.
So I think it's okay. Like, you're right, Sneb, in that yes, you should let them know that, hey, this might be a little bit tougher than what you'd expect and whatnot. And I mean, I'm always of the opinion that the best way to learn something is just jump in and do it. And if your group is okay with that, then go for it, right? But I think the issue here is the nuance that we're talking about is a lot more pronounced than in other classes, right? Like, the nuances of Virtuoso is like totally different from the nuances of Heal Tempest. But the punishment you get for not understanding those nuances as Heal Tempest is way more. So, knowing that, I asked the question, how do we, again, as a community, make it clear how important those nuances are relative to the class that we're playing?
I definitely think people should be informed, right? Like, I think that we're calling parts here. They're a little bit. Oh yeah, go ahead. Go.
I was actually gonna say, I actually wonder if we're like jumping the gun a little bit. So I think part of the reason why people are so scared of like raids and stuff is because they think that you need to do a lot of preparation in order to clear it. Which obviously, the more preparation you do, the easier the encounter is going to be, right? But I do also think that it's kind of a double-edged sword, because what ends up happening is you end up why not just give people the benefit of the doubt, right? It's like I still stand by the fact that I don't think Heal Tempest is not that difficult to play, because you have a lot of buffer room if you run high boon duration. But I guess it's like I wouldn't tell someone that the class that they're playing is difficult until they've already proven to me that they find it difficult, if that makes any sense, right? It's kind of like more reactionary than it is preventative. It's like if someone is, dropping a lot of alacrity uptime when they're playing Heal Tempest, then I might jump in and I might say, hey, you're probably not overloading enough, or are you canceling it? Do you need someone to give you stability? Do you need to run more boon duration? Do you need food? Whatever it's called. And then I would try to diagnose the problem, right? But like, I wouldn't jump the gun immediately and say like, oh, you're playing a build that's like, that's less effective than, I don't know, like a Mechadus or something.
I think this is all communication strategy. Like, again, I think we missed it there. I think you kind of missed it. It's not that. It's not that you wait to jump in. It's just I think the way that we communicate what Sneb is saying needs to be incredibly delicate, because I think we need to understand how people perceive things. Like, if you say in the Guild Wars 2 community, or this is probably true in any MMO community, actually. If you say, if you play Heal Tempest, you're going to have a significantly harder time playing this build, people are going to go, okay, yeah, this build is unplayable trash, right? You might not agree with that rationality, but that is how people perceive it, right?
Can I explain how I actually tell people this then? This is what I say. Somebody says, hey, I want to play, and because this actually happened like 2 days ago in my Discord. Somebody said, hey, how is Heal Alac Tempest? And I said, hey, the build is super powerful. It is extremely potent. It will complete every piece of content in the game. However, the timing with this is a little bit more difficult. If you're willing to, sort of figure that out and put in the effort, you'll be a god tier gamer with Heal Alac Tempest.
Yeah,
I think that's how I say it.
I think that part is lost too. The middle ground of picking up a class and getting good with it is the learning process, right? Like, if I'm going into a group and going, hey, I'm playing this class and I'm learning it still, is that okay? And they go, yeah. I'm not gonna be, or I'll reframe this. If a Heal Alac Tempest joins and they say they're learning or whatnot, and I go okay as the leader, and they're not having 100% alacrity uptime, that's not on me to get upset. Like, I won't get upset because I understand that they're learning, right? So a lot of it, again, is communication between the player learning the class and the person or people understanding that player is learning. Yeah. Because, like, I'm not going to fret if somebody doesn't get 100% alac uptime. If it's like 80, 85 and they're learning, it's whatever. Like, the boss is going to die. It's Veil Guardian. Who cares? Like, that's not going to make or break a raid. And if the player is going back and say, hey, I only got 80% of lack up time, how can I improve on this? Then that's a step, right? So, like, it's okay for things not to be perfect, is what I'm trying to say. It's okay for things not to be, like, excellent from the get-go as long as communication happens.
Yeah, and I also think it's important to communicate to people that people don't expect you to be perfect either. Like, because you know, this has almost been underlining this entire discussion. Is there is this idea that, oh, if you don't play perfectly, then oh, boom, kicked, or like, oh yeah. You can't play raids. This is not true, right? Let me tell you this for all the lovely listeners, that is not true. Trust me, right? I've been in plenty of raid pugs where it's a total clown fiesta, and everyone does, you know what? GG, we killed it in the end, right? We got there, right? It died.
You should have
right?
seen my first run on Scrapper when I bulwark gyro by accident for the first time. I exploded, and I just had no idea what was going on until I read my skill, and I was like, oh.
Do you know what's really funny about that? Do you know about this interaction? This one's so good. I wonder if they fixed. I think they might have fixed it actually, but it used to work. If you elixir S while you have bulwark gyro up, there was a bug. I'm not sure it's in the game right now, but it actually damaged the allies instead of you. So basically, what you would do in World versus World, but it multiplied the damage. It bugged out. So basically, you know how it like gives you 33% of the damage they take. It magnified it to like 500% damage that they take to themselves. So basically, you could actually like one-shot your own team in World versus World with like Bulwark Gyro Elixir S combo. It's really funny.
That's hilarious.
But I'm not sure it's in the game anymore actually, but it was pretty good. You could like insta kill like full minstrel warriors on your own team with this. But yeah.
But yeah, like like the learning process is like super important. I think a lot of players like forget that, hey, there's a learning curve to a lot of things in this game, and the learning curve is pretty steep too. Like I went from exploding from bulwark gyro to learning that you can block bulwark gyro's damage. Like, and I didn't know that until like a month ago. And little things like that matter so much, and understanding nuances and how those nuances affect how you play is really important.
Yeah. And
I think.
I just wanted to very quickly do a bit of a callback to when I almost activated. Because you said that, Emi, you said that the class distribution on Wingman is good. And again, I would agree with that. But again, I need to split the hair on this. It's really important, I think. It's not that the actual reality fact of the matter is bad, it's that it's perceived to be bad, right? Like, this is the entire conversation. This is literally TeaTime hair-splitting edition, right? Like, that's the entire, but it's important. It's not like a stupid hair split. It's a really important hair to split here, I think. And is it absolutely true that all of these things, like in the fact of the matter, are actually okay? Yes. Is the raid community actually pretty wholesome and honestly pretty not caring that much about fucking up sometimes? Actually, yes, that's true. Are you ever really going to get called out for playing a build that's slightly unusual? Realistically, no, it's not going to happen. Hell, if you tag up, are you going to get flamed for tagging up? Realistically, no, that's going to be a pretty low occurrence, right? A low frequency occurrence, right? Like, all of these things are true. But the problem that I really see that I think massively inhibits the growth of the scene and actually the perception of the players, and honestly, like the sentiment towards different player groups, especially groups that kind of are a bit more separated off, a little bit more hardcore, if we will, is the perception is very, very poor. And the idea that these groups are incredibly closed off, incredibly toxic, incredibly strict with the way you play, incredibly intolerant of failure or learning. And yeah, basically that they're big meanies. And I think that this isn't the case, but I think the perception is that they are. Also, Frog, I want to see some floating flute time combos in the chat. Let's go. It's my new favorite combo. Let's go. Floating and then flute jam. Let's go. Oh, yeah, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, Emi.
I'm going to split the hair that you split. I'm going to split it again.
We're microscopic now.
Yeah. Get the microscope out.
I do think that the perception of certain builds is better or worse for certain ones. But kind of going back to what I was saying earlier, I actually feel like that perception is not really true, if that makes any sense. I feel like in a way, it's what you're saying is a very exaggerated form of what people actually think. And I think personally speaking, most of the people that I've talked to, they like come and they're like, "Oh wow, I've been having a lot of fun with like Quick Scrap, or I've been having a lot of fun with like Heal Tempest, or I've been having a lot of fun with STMP Chrono or something like that." And I'm like, "Yeah, good for you." I don't think I've ever seen anyone like shut that down, if that makes any sense. In other words, I actually think that the perception right now of all of these different builds is actually a fairly good one. Like whenever I look for like one quick, one alack or whatever it's called, I get a fair number of people just joining from LFG that are like playing like I
Yes,
see you, like,
in the game mode. Yes, in the game mode. I'm talking about outside of the game mode.
but where outside of the game
I'm
mode?
talking
If
to
you're
people.
talking
I'm
about-
talking about the people who don't play raids. I'm talking about the people who don't play these game modes. Like, you're absolutely right. If you open,
I
if
don't think that that's true. I think like one bad YouTube comment under like one like video that you made is not enough to say that that is the entire perception of the game mode.
Do you ever
I think there's an
peruse
exception.
the like Facebook groups or any of those social media things?
I can't say I do Facebook, but I am fairly active on the forums and on Reddit.
Okay,
and
well,
I feel like
you should join the Facebook groups because they
well-
get really upset about raids very frequently.
I
But I
think
guess
I
it's
think
like-
one class is an exception, and it's Chrono. I think the perception of Chrono is
Alack
pretty
Chrono is
bad.
not very good right now, but
yeah.
and I'm a Mesmerate.
I think even Quickness Chrono's perception is pretty bad right now. Like despite it being
I
quite
don't
good.
think so. I guess my main pushback here is that I think listening to these very, very small minority groups, like obviously, yes, they influence the perception because the loud minority or the vocal minority will always have influence, right? But that's such a small percentage, like honestly, fairly minuscule part of the community that even giving them weight, I feel like is kind of feeding into the negative publicity, if that makes any sense. It's kind of like
Wouldn't they
making
just call
it a
that
bigger deal
exclusionary
than
and
it is.
elitist though?
I've never been called that. And I feel like I don't think if someone did call me that, it would be such a small, insignificant part of the community that I would not conflate that with the bigger community, if that makes any sense. It's like, I don't know. It's like listening to a troll that comes in to call me a stupid e-girl or something and then saying, "Oh my gosh, the Guild Wars 2 is full of sexist assholes." Like, you know, that's just not true. That's just one person. I don't think that's the overall perception of the game.
I think what we're trying to get at is that those people do that, what you just described, right? They have one bad experience and now they're sort of spreading it in their smaller niche communities, which can grow and grow and grow if sometimes.
Yeah, or they have a bad experience and they say they had that specific bad experience and the people listening will conflate it.
I mean, I've
don't know,
literally
I
engaged
guess-
with people where they've told me, they've said raids should never have been made because they are
this is a good
horrible
one.
for X,
Yeah.
Y, and Z, right? And I've actually been like, oh man, like what happened? Like what experience did you have? And they said, I've never actually even tried raids, to be honest. that's what they say. But they're perpetuating a narrative, you know?
I feel I guess my main pushback here though, but that's one person. Right? It's like listening, let's say you go to like this super obscure news source that's like spewing a bunch of bullshit and then saying that that's the perception of the game. I guess I just
What if
don't
I told
think
you that was
that's
the most
true.
liked post?
I mean, okay, but it's like saying that's the most liked post on this super obscure news source. It's
No,
obviously like an
no,
echo
these are not
chamber.
obscure. These are like really big pages. These
I
are
don't
like
know. I
really big
guess
communities.
if you can link it to me, then maybe I'll change my. It's just I guess I don't like giving these vocal minorities too much weight, and I feel like a lot of the times on content creation streams or podcasts and stuff, we tend to do that because that's what we hear. But that's not the perception that I think a lot of like people who don't invest that much time into the game. I don't think that that's what they hear.
Well,
I think their
Well,
perception
I
is a lot more
disagree, though.
distilled.
So my concern
I disagree because otherwise more people would try raids.
I
think
think the
there's
reason why
some-
people don't try raids is not because of the perception of the raids. I think it's
I
more
think
of a
it
time
has a part
commitment.
to
Oh,
it.
I think it's
Yeah.
absolutely.
It's a
I think
part.
it's actually the biggest reason. Actually.
Really?
Yeah, 100%.
don't-
I hear it a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whenever I train,
Yeah.
people tell me they perceive raids to be about 3 times as hard as they
Yeah,
actually are.
100%. Yeah, I think it's
Yeah.
always perception that they're
I'm not
incredibly
saying that it
difficult.
doesn't
They're
exist.
I think it's the main reason why people don't get into
It-
into
I think
any.
that
I don't know that it's
any
the main
game.
reason, but it is a reason. It is
Anytime
definitely a
I've
reason.
anytime
I
I've
think
written a
it is
piece,
a reason.
anytime I've written a piece about Guild Wars 2 rating, it's always at least a 3-4 comments. It's just like, wow, I didn't know the Guild Wars 2 community like had nice raiders or something like that, and it's just like
Maybe I need to get out of my bubble more, because the majority of people that I've talked to, because I trained in the Raiders Academy Discord for a few years before I started branching off and doing my own stream, the vast majority of people said they just didn't have time. That was the biggest limiter for them. Like, these are people who don't ingest any sort of like social media, like yours to creation or content creation at all. Most of them just said, I didn't have time. I could only like spend like 1 to 2 hours a week, like, doing open world collections and that sort of thing. And I just felt like, if I have to invest the time into rating, that's just not a good use of my time.
And that's
But
definitely like one of the big ones.
But what does that mean, though? I think we need to break that down, because if they think that learning raids takes an exorbitant amount of time, that's really interesting. That means that they perceive raids to be really, really hard.
I do think that that is a point, but like I said, most of the people, like, they gave rating a try once they even just had 1 or 2 extra hours of free time. Again, I think most of these people, a lot of them came from backgrounds from other MMOs where they could just jump into rating like immediately, right? And it's like they just weighed the cost and payoff and that sort of thing. They just decided, even 1 hour of time was not enough for them. It's
I wonder
I
if
imagine
they
there's a sliding scale in there.
I wonder if
but-
they think all the wings you have to do I wonder if they think that you have to do all the wings straight.
I do think that that's part
That
of
might
it.
be
I I think the perception
That
is
would be
more
big.
about the actual
The full
game
clear.
systems. Yeah, I think the perception is more about the game systems than it is about the negativity in the games. At least this is what I would say for the vast majority. Obviously, there are going to be some people who are influenced by, like, the potential negativity that they might encounter. But I think, even I'm going to speak even for myself. When I first like started trying to raid, I had to sit down for a 2 hour raid training session, right? That's a lot of time to commit when you have a full-time job, a family to take care of, kids that you have to send to school, I don't know, maybe elderly parents that you have to like watch over. Like that's a lot of time for like working adults and stuff. So it's like, I don't know. I guess most of the people that I talked to, it had nothing to do with their perception of whether or not raids were difficult or easy or something like that. It was just another thing that they had to add to the checklist that they weren't willing to invest the time into.
That makes sense, yeah.
So that's why I'm pushing back so hard on this, is because, at least in my experience, which is obviously a bubble, I'm going to acknowledge that. Like, I don't write, MMO pages, so you probably have a lot more experience with that. But I do think that this idea that the perception of raids being a very toxic one, I do think it has changed a lot, especially since the release of End of Dragons. And
I
I
would agree with
don't
that.
think it's the prevailing narrative anymore.
It's so for like different games, not to touch on different games too much, but the perception is definitely different depending on the game. Guild Wars 2 is one of the few that I've experienced where the primary narrative is that it's toxic.
Really?
Yeah, like some games is just like the raids are too long or just straight up too difficult. The other is just like the gear requirement is too much, things like that. But Guild Wars 2 is one of the few where like the main like big narrative, like that over encompasses everything, is that it's toxic. But like I we know that it's not nearly as toxic as they think it is, but the perception is just so skewed compared to.
I'm always personally interested in why people think that, right? And I always ask, and it always has to do. They usually cite like one bad experience or someone else's bad experience,
right?
Or they cite difficulty.
And that makes sense. That makes sense, right?
Yeah.
I will say, the learning communities, so like training raids and training discords and stuff like that, it's, at least in personal experience, it's the second hardest one to find and get into, mostly because like people don't know it exists. Not necessarily because of the community, but people just don't know.
My recent experience, people don't want to know it exists.
But like I know in Final Fantasy, finding a training raid group is very easy. There are multiple, like it's really easy. But I think from what I've seen in Guild Wars, it's the second hardest out of the MMOs have rated in.
What was the hardest?
Lost Ark, easily.
Lost Ark.
Lost Ark rating is like again, I don't want to touch too much on other MMOs, and I am a multiple MMO gamer, and I love Lost Ark dearly. But finding a learning group is impossible in that raid or in that game.
Yep.
It is very hard.
I'll just add a little bit of context here for people who don't play Lost Ark. It's because once you've cleared the content, you can't do it again that week. So almost nobody wants to invest time into training because you've already cleared. So anyways, that's just kind of like an aside. So yeah, I guess honestly, I'd be really interested into like reading that more. So if you can send me some links to that, that would broaden my perspectives a little bit, because again, I acknowledge that my experience is obviously very biased, but again, just most of the people that I've talked to, it's not a negative perception thing. It's just they don't have time. I think Guild Wars 2 caters to a very, you know, a very casual like community, right? It's like obviously you have the toxic casuals, but most people are just innocent casuals. They just don't have the time or effort or mental bandwidth to spend into doing higher level content. So
In sales, when someone says they don't have the time, that usually means something else, in my experience at
Mind
least.
reader Sneb.
So no. Like if you go to someone and you say, hey, like you're somebody who has X problem, do you want to talk about solutions to that? And they go, I don't have time. What that really means oftentimes is I don't see the value in it, or it's not valuable to me. And so when people are saying I don't have time to do raids, what goes through my head immediately is, well, how much time do you really need to do raids? And then I think, okay, well, if somebody's playing casually, maybe an hour or two here and there, they could learn raids, but they don't perceive it as either fun enough or valuable enough to them or important enough to them. And so it's not really about the time, it's about perceived value, or maybe there's a problem that they're not disclosing. But
I think
it's
that's a
not about the
good point.
time, right? It's not usually about the time. Time is usually a
I
scapegoat.
I don't disagree with that, and I imagine there's a lot of truth to what you're saying, but I also think for a lot of people this is just a game, right? It's like I can very easily say for myself for other games when I played Final Fantasy, once I got into the higher level content and I needed to grind out the gear and everything so I could do like, you know, meet the item level, it wasn't that I didn't want to. It wasn't that I didn't think that I couldn't, but that's just a lot of time that I wasn't willing to invest. Like I think obviously there's going to be some people with like some underlying problems, but I'm willing to bet that the vast majority of people just see this as a game with no stakes, and you know what? That kind of effort is just not something that they want to expend.
And
I think we're basically saying the same thing. What I'm saying is it's less about the time and more about the value for the time, right? They look at the
Yeah.
time and they go, I just don't see why I would do this when I can do this instead. They weigh the pros and cons, and there's some other reason other than the time that's actually why they'd say, okay, I don't see the value in spending my time doing that, given that time is a finite resource.
Is there a way we can change that?
Well, yes, but it takes a lot of work, right? It's about pushing. So if somebody were to say, I don't have the time, I'd go, oh, what makes you say that? And they'd say, well, you know, I play a couple times a week and I've only got an hour or two here and there. And I go, oh, well, have you considered, you know, there are training discords and things you can do? And they go, I don't want to sign up for that. I want to be able to just jump in because my playtime is, you know, variable. And then you go, okay, now we've kind of uncovered the problem here. The problem is that they do have the time, but the organization involved is too great for them because that takes up, you know, so much of their time that they would rather do other things they can just jump into. So it's really about the process and the organization, not necessarily about rating itself.
Right.
Yeah, I actually think that's a really good idea. I mean, but I will say I don't think there's anything we can really do about that though, right?
Yeah.
That's just because the game doesn't have any built-in
Mhm.
voice channels, and like we have almost no control over like what we can put into the LFG, right? It's like we just have to use the tabs that are given to us. So I think that's a very systemic issue. So
Yeah, the best thing you can do is create environments where those kind of people have opportunities to be exposed to positive raid encounters, right? So, I mean, I've taken people, I had somebody that they were like, I will pay you like 300 gold to get this Kadim the Peerless CM kill. And I was like,
Wow.
why would you do that? You're in our guild. And they were like, I just don't have a lot of time to play. And I went, well, let's make a group. So I made a group right then and there. We got some gamers in there, took a couple polls, and we got the kill. And now that person has a really good time because they had, you know, they read the fight, they knew about the fight, they were experienced. I think they even, you know, survived the whole fight. They just couldn't get a group off the cuff because it was just so you know, their schedule was so wild. But now that person will go and say, hey, you know, these things are very doable. You just have to be able to get a group together. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that you try to create positive experiences for people.
yeah, I 100%
Because
agree.
otherwise that person
Yeah,
goes
absolutely.
and they buy the raid, and now they tell everyone the only way I was able to get this was to pay someone to do it for me.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I
Yeah.
do think that's important, but I do Isn't that a little bit disingenuous though, right? It's like
Ooh,
Kadimsium is a fairly
I
it is
mean,
a fairly
Yeah.
difficult encounter. I think being able to 1 to 2 pull it with a group of experienced people, that is a fairly rare experience.
Oh
Because
yeah,
like,
I mean,
I do think also, like, viewers too, I don't think we should have only easy things to do, right? It's like, I think
I
having
cherry picked a really
yeah.
extreme example, but I've seen people in the LFG that somebody said I need 1 raid boss kill, paying 400 gold, and then like 7 raid sellers immediately went in there, and I went in there and I said, do not buy from any of them. I will help you make a group right now, and we'll kill a raid boss.
Okay,
yeah,
yeah, I
like
mean, that is also true. I think, like,
Yeah.
I find this to be especially the case with some of the easier, like, Envoy 1 collections, where you literally just need,
Mhm.
like, a participation trophy, right? So I think that I would completely agree with. You just toss a couple of peoples together, have a good time, and then everybody goes and, like, talks about the positive experience. But I do think that there is a bit of, like, I think especially with the higher level content, because I think if we market those as easy, it's just going to lead into a potential negative
I was
perspective.
not saying
So
that was easy. Yeah, I
yeah.
misspoke then. If that's the
Okay.
takeaway. No, no, no. What I'm trying to express is that we have a responsibility to try to create positive experiences for people all the time so that they will spread that positivity.
Mm.
And the problem is that the standard for people is good. People don't talk about their good experiences.
Yeah.
They talk about their amazing experiences and they talk about their
All the
bad
bad
experiences
Agreed.
stuff.
and
yeah,
nothing else. So what happens is if we go around and we create those really positive experiences for people where they're like, man, you know what? I probably wouldn't have been able to just get a group for Kidium CM. But this guy saw that I needed help and he like rallied the troops from a bunch of different discords and we did it. And that was a hard encounter. And these people helped me out. And now I think that the rating scene has some good in it, and they
Yeah.
spread that
Mhm.
message. But they would have gone and paid 300 gold, and that wouldn't have even been a bad experience necessarily, right? They get the kill,
yeah, and now they have a goal
but
for their
but they
tag.
don't talk about that. That's not something that's
Mm.
spoken about.
And
They're just like, oh,
Yeah,
this
whatever.
is so
the
important. This is so important because Emmy, you're absolutely right. The narrative around raids is shaped by a small negative minority. You're absolutely right, but I would say that's always the case, right? I would say the narrative on every topic that exists is actually shaped by a very small amount of people who actually speak up, right? So if we actually could create experiences that cause people to actually feel the need to get in there and speak up more positively, then that is how you change it. Because, and you're actually right on this. I think this is actually getting better, but I still think we've got a long way to go. But yeah, go ahead, Larry.
yeah, the big thing is, as somebody said in chat, you got to hook them. You got to get them in there and give them a good experience, as Sneb said, because maybe that one good experience will make them want to try it on their own, even if it's kind of difficult. They'll be like, you know what, raids aren't that bad, because that one person I carried for that Veil Guardian that we did a few months ago that I needed for the week, that person just kept raiding because they had that one good experience. And the whole goal is to get one person in. If one person gets their foot in the door, maybe they get another person's foot in the door, maybe they get their friend. And that's how you grow a community, is these positive experiences, constantly getting people in and wanting to do more. Even if a few people don't, that's okay too. Like, if you get one person in the door and 9 people decide not to do it, that's okay.
Yeah. I actually think that's a really good point. So I'm just going to reiterate it again because I've always very strongly believed this. But you don't have to have 100% success rate, right? It's like you don't need, or not success rate with like the rate, but you don't need to convert 100% of people into like doing something good, right? It's like if you're just one person and if you can like convert even 2 more people into having like a positive experience, spreading the positive word, having them be more vocal, you've essentially tripled like the number of people in your circle that is now doing this, right? And
Yeah.
if those 2 people then also spread it to 2 more people, then you have exponential growth, right? It's
Yep.
like I think that's always like whenever I like lead these big raid trainings or like these like meta events or like the HOT map completion trains that I do, I almost always every single stream someone asks like why do you do this? Why what's the point of this, right? Especially for me, right? Because I've pretty much done everything I need to do in the game. And obviously there's a social part of it, right? I do it just because it's fun to spend time with other people online. But then there's also the part of me that's thinking, this is how I met a lot of the really fantastic raiders in my community. I can think of 4 of them off the top of my head where they went from meeting me in this train that I led in open world, and then kind of getting curious about end game content. And then now they are some of the best players in the game. Like I'm talking consistent speedrunners. They're part of a very big raid selling group. So like that sort of thing. You know, they're very good players now. They have really high DPS to the point where they're #1 on Guild Wars 2 Wingman. I didn't need to convert every single person that I ever spoke to in my map completion trains, right? But just these 4, I'm like so proud of them. And now they're doing it for other people too. Like they're leading pug grades. They're leading like, they're teaching other people whenever they ask them questions. They actually sit down with them one-on-one in a Discord call and like show them how they like play their class and that sort of thing. So it's like, I don't know. I just wanted to add that because I think that's completely true.
I am living
You
proof.
might talk to 100 people and only 3 actually like listen, and then only 1 takes action. But in many regards, that 1 is worth it.
Yes, I am living proof of exactly this. Like when I returned to the game, my IRL friend was like, "Hey, you should do raids." I was like, I don't really care for raids or whatever. Legendary was kind of cool though. So she got me into a group. We do Tuesdays and Fridays, and Fridays is usually like the training group. And I did it for the first time. I think, what was the first one we did? Yeah, it was Wing 1. And I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm trying to figure it out. And I got immediately hooked because even though I'm almost done with my legendary gear, I still am gonna raid after because raiding is just so fun. My group is fun. Like the content is cool. I enjoy it. Like even if I'm not maining Guild Wars 2, I'm probably still gonna raid in it because it's so fun. Like like is and I'm just one person.
Oh yeah. Oh yes. Oh yeah. And I feel like we've come full circle here, right? We've gone all the way around with this stuff. We joined the topics together in a beautiful way, right? We must.
Wait. I have one more ad. One more ad.
Oh, okay.
I think that in addition to providing these positive experiences, and this is where I think Emi and I will disagree. I think that we have an obligation to correct misinformation. I think that if somebody is going around and they're saying really horrible things about raiders or whatever, I think that you need to go and be like, hey, that's not true. I've had these really positive experiences, and you need to sort of fight the negative with the positive. The whole archangel demon battle picture. That's what needs to happen.
It's the semi-time. Okay, I will say, actually, you are correct. I do disagree with that a little bit. I think if it is directly affecting the efforts that I'm trying to make. So for example, if I were to put myself in your shoes, right? It's like you're advertising for, the whole like skin game, like everything, and someone was actively sabotaging that, then yes, I absolutely agree. I think it is kind of your responsibility as the leader of that group to kind of shut that down. But what I don't agree with is I think if there are people that are being malicious agents, right? And they are kind of talking in their own like echo chambers and stuff, and they're having almost no effect, at least on the operations that I've decided to spend my own time on. I don't think it's worth my own mental bandwidth to deal with that, if that makes any sense.
If someone is in a public forum like Twitter or Facebook or any social media and they're actively spreading misinformation, I feel like I have an obligation to correct that kindly in a nice way.
Yeah, I mean, obviously in a kind of, and I'll kind of like call this out a little bit. Sorry, Isa, but he kind of made this kind of off-putting joke on Twitter a few weeks ago, and I think that's the spiciest I ever got on Twitter because I basically called him out on it.
Me?
I was like, no, Isa.
Oh, I thought you said me. I was like,
No,
I am
no.
so
I'm just gonna call out Isa a little here because he said afterwards it was just a poorly made joke and that sort of thing, and I completely understand he wasn't being malicious, but it's like I do agree if it is affecting, especially people within your own circles, and if you see it, don't be a bystander, right? But I also think actively going out of your way to go kick the hornet's nest and then complaining that you got stung also doesn't make much sense. It's like I think there's
I think I traverse the public social media stuff. I see things where people are actively spreading misinformation and I go, all right, that you can't do that. That's not right. Like you can't go and tell everyone that all raiders are evil. People make very blanket statements, and in my opinion, they're doing a great deal of harm to the public perception of the game because that's what people see, whether it's on Reddit or Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. It doesn't really matter. If you're in a public facing forum and you're telling people things that aren't true, that's harmful.
I mean, I agree. I don't think anyone should be a bystander, right? It's like if you see it, if it is right there, if it has been brought to your awareness, I do think it is correct to call it out. But I also think that putting yourself in a position where you're getting exposed to a lot of those things instead of, I guess, just focusing those efforts elsewhere, I do think, I mean, objectively, I think that's incorrect, right? It's like if you could be spending this time, let's say, like growing your own community, or in my case, like if I wanted to, like, lead more like public facing events, more new player events, even like let's say like making YouTube content guides, website content guides, which by the way I'm not going to do because that's too much work. But if I were, that would be where I would put my effort in instead, because it's a much more efficient use of my time. Right.
Yes.
Whereas
Okay.
like
Well,
fighting, I think I don't know, I guess I just fighting
no,
one
no,
or
no, no, no,
two.
no, no, no.
Sorry, go ahead.
Emmy. Okay, listen
Uh-oh.
here though. The
Debate.
reason that it probably looks like I'm actively seeking this out is because of those efforts, right? I have 85 teams and have gone really hard at trying to get people to play together and progress and be on raid teams. People actively challenge that all the time. All the time, right? Because of the efforts that I put in, I am actively challenged and attacked for these things. So I do it to myself by putting in these efforts. I think there's no way to avoid that.
No, then I think we're talking about different things then. What I'm trying to say is that obviously if you're being exposed to it due to your efforts, then yes, I do agree. I think it is your responsibility to shut it down. But what I'm saying is that there are these isolated islands of communities of people who are saying probably very terrible things about people who have very good intentions. I don't think it's our responsibility to go deal with those people.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know where those islands are, so I'm not going there. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I agree. I think what I'm trying to say is I don't go
Then
to
we're
those
on the same
islands.
page.
Yeah,
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 then we're on the
no,
same
but I
page.
think you've insinuated before that I go to those islands. I don't go to the islands. The islands are coming to
Okay,
me
then you
because
can
they're
blame
mad that I
Teapot
would
for that
even.
because he says that he actively goes
Oh
into the
yeah,
lion's
no,
den. So
I
I assume.
absolutely do. Yeah, I do. I love conflict. I do.
See,
think
but
I
I
think you
think that
do
conflict
to an
goes to
extent.
you a lot more than you go to the conflict even. I that's my argument is I think that conflict naturally comes to people who are trying to make a difference.
I agree. I think this is where I fundamentally agree with that. I think if you are putting yourself out there, you're painting a target on your back. And I think that dealing with those people, yes, I agree that is part of your responsibility. But what I'm more of thinking is like, if someone is, let's say, like, made a raid LFG, you see this sometimes on the NA server where they're like calling out one person who is like, you probably know them, you know they're like an okay person, and they're saying, this guy is toxic, he kicked me from a group, he like doesn't know anything. I think picking those kinds of fights is so dumb. I think it's
I
just
just
a
kind of
waste
laugh
of
at that
time.
stuff and move on. Like it has
Yeah,
nothing to
yeah,
do
and
with
I think
me, right? That's what I'm
yeah.
getting.
Okay, then I think again we're on the same page here. I think there is kind of a perception, I think, especially with like content creators, not just in Guild Wars 2, but like every content creation series, where it's like we actively go pick fights with people just for the sake of drama and so that we can get clicks and views. And what I'm saying is I don't think, for one, I don't think that's true. And two, I don't think you should. I think that is morally like incorrect to like spend your mental bandwidth on that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, I don't think it's necessarily about morality. I think it's about pragmatism. It's about effectiveness. Realistically, I'm actually a bit doom-pilled on this. And I think this is true in all scenarios. I actually don't think correcting misinformation is actually very effective. I think the effective strategy of dealing with misinformation is to actually simply provide so much of your own information that is hopefully correct that it causes the misinformation to become non-credible in the face of what you're producing. For example, I am not super bothered, or rather, I don't think Sneb should be super bothered if people call him toxic, because the body of his work makes that claim inherently absurd, right? Like, you don't even need to respond to it, in a sense. And I think that making that type of effort by kind of spreading that information out there of like, oh, this person does this, right? Because I think, fundamentally, I think people are actually very reasonable. You know what? That's a hot take right there. People might disagree with me there. But fundamentally, I think people are actually very reasonable. But they're also trusting as well, because I mean, who isn't, right? So if someone says with no context Sneb is toxic, people are going to go like, oh shit, Sneb is toxic. That's fucking crazy. But the thing is, if it's widely known the type of person that Sneb is and the activities that he, the initiatives that he pushes, then that claim is going to be, in my opinion, examined a lot more critically, right? I think that people are going to go like, wait, what do you mean by that, right? Like, what's going on there? I think that, again, the best way to counter claims like that is to simply spread your message as much as possible. So that, again, like when people make a claim like that, it's in direct contradiction to some kind of fact of the matter. And I think that will mean that the claim doesn't do anything, right? It becomes meaningless.
Yeah, I mean, I think resources are always like the best way to get your information out to like the vast majority of people. So it's the most efficient way to do it. But I'm going to push back on that a little bit because I think those individual people do matter, right? Like maybe not towards changing the Givers 2 community as a whole, but for that one person, it probably matters a lot, right? Just their individual, like, their individual experience and enjoyment of the game. And I feel like I try to empathize a lot with people that might be, what other people might write off as like someone rude or toxic or, someone emotionally charged, they're just wrong, that sort of thing. And I try to think like, okay, could I ever imagine myself to be in a very similar position? And I think the honest answer is kind of yes, right? It's like, imagine if I didn't have the support group that is my own community right now. I come into this game, maybe I came out of like a really bad breakup or a really tough time at work, and then I'm just frustrated. I just wanted to kick back and relax. And then someone tells me that I'm doing something wrong, right? Like, of course I'm going to get defensive. Of course I'm going to be really sad, probably. I'm just going to think, okay, well, I guess I don't really fit in here either. It's very depressing, especially for just one individual person. So it's like, yeah, that one person might not make a big difference towards the overall perception of the Gyorsu community, but isn't it important for that one person to also enjoy the game? And I think that's why I like to invest a lot of time into like these people who I think Sneb might be doing it to shut down misinformation, but for me, I'm kind of thinking, why is this person thinking this in the first place? They're probably not in a very good place right now, you know?
As someone
Yeah,
who
it
is,
really depends what they're saying, right? It really,
Yeah.
really depends.
Yeah, I
If
mean,
somebody's
obviously, if they're saying
I
you're
mean,
like,
look, there's the guy that likes to write like short stories to Teapot about his
oh,
negative views on the game. Like that's
yeah,
that to
yeah,
me, there's just really not much you can do, right? but for the people
You got to
that
choose your
they go
battles.
around and they say,
yeah.
if somebody goes and they say raids are
God.
absolutely impossible, it is impossible to find a group. They are hopeless and they should have zero attention in Guild Wars 2. I'm gonna go and be like, why do you feel that way? That's my experience is this. Why do you feel that way? I'm gonna try to use the Socratic method at least a little bit to see why that is. But what I found is that even the second you do that, you say, well, what makes you say that? A lot of people immediately get defensive. I think people just want to vent, but it's important that if you see these ventings, that you don't let everyone think that that's how it is for everyone,
I think
because that can create a really bad environment. Then suddenly everyone thinks what that person thinks.
I wonder if this might be a little bit of a spicy take. I will say I don't mean this with like 100% conviction, more just like a thought bubble. I do think just asking someone, why do you think that way, can come across as very combative because it's kind of
Really?
like it's forcing them
What,
to justify their because okay, I think
what,
it's
what if I phrase it
multifaceted.
slightly differently? What makes you say that?
Boom.
I okay, again, you can say that in person and that will come across very differently
In
than if you type it.
text.
In
Yes.
text,
Oh,
it's
That's
going to
true.
come
Yeah,
across
that's true.
it's gonna make them feel like
true.
if you say that, it's gonna make them think, "Oh, am I wrong for thinking this?" Right? It's like, I don't think there's any malicious
I feel like
intention,
people
but
are being a little too introspective. If somebody's like, "Oh,
no, no,
if
no,
you go on
I
a public
genuinely think so
forum and
because
they do that, I don't know. It's a
I
little
think
bit."
if you just drop a one-liner on like a public forum without any context, any emotional like, emojis or intonation that's kind of like written into the text whatsoever, people's default reaction is going to assume that you mean it in a negative way because
What makes you say
most
that?
people on the
Smiley
internet
face.
do say that. That's even worse. Okay, okay, let me kind
Smiley
of give an
face with two
example.
mouths.
Okay, let me kind of give an example because I've been in this situation before, and I like to think I go full keyboard warrior sometimes, where I spend a lot of time typing things. But it's because I always want to make sure that my intention is conveyed through text. If I were in that situation, someone's venting something like that, what I would say is I'd be like, hey dude, I'm really sorry that like, you feel this way. Like I imagine it was probably really frustrating for you, but do you mind explaining me why you feel that way? I'm in XYZ situation and actually see a lot of people in this in your exact same scenario, and I really wish that I knew what to do to like help people like you more. Right?
Yeah,
That comes
yeah,
across completely differently than just asking you, why do you feel that way?
yeah. How you say things is just as important
Yeah,
as what you're
I
saying.
think it
It's not that I
obviously
don't care about that, but I mean, oh boy, that means that they're being really sensitive, right? If I ask a simple question like, "Oh, what makes you think that?"
I mean, but if they're
Smiley
already in a
face.
It
position where they're venting and saying extreme things, then yes, they are going to
And
be
then they
sensitive.
flame
I
me
think
out, and then I'm like, "Oh,
I
all
think it's
right.
less
Well,
about them being sensitive and more about being a little bit more considerate at little to no cost to you.
oh yeah, well, I'm not saying that I don't make an effort to be considerate. I make quite an effort, I think, a lot of the time, but no one's ever going to be perfect. I don't think it's justified to like counterflame someone because they ask a question. Like if somebody comes into my chat and they're like, is this a training run?" I can, because we're failing, I can absolutely flame them out and be like, "Why would you, insinuate that my people don't know what they're doing, blah, blah, blah." Or I can be like, "No, actually, we're just struggling right now." Right? You have a choice on how to respond to these things too.
I agree. But again, I think this is where the empathy comes in, right? It's like, yeah, I saw someone mention earlier, if you're not socially equipped to deal with these things, okay, do we just say fuck you? Like, I guess
Well,
that to me,
no,
that
of course not.
that wasn't directed towards you. That was the person who typed that out in chat. But I guess the point that I'm trying to make is, yeah, there's going to be some people who are more or less sensitive. There's going to be some people who are more equipped to deal with social interaction, especially online, where a lot of things can be potentially like be misinterpreted. But I guess it's like for those people, isn't it more important to like, I guess, tailor your words so that you can convince them to come around and enact some sort of change, whether it's in their own behavior or how they treat other people, than it is to just prove that you have the moral high ground over this
Well,
person?
I'm
Because
never trying to prove that I have a moral high
yeah,
ground.
yeah, again, this is not directly towards you. This is again towards
Yeah.
the people
Well,
who are in
well,
chat who
no,
are
it's just
saying like,
important that I say that so that people don't think that it's directed towards me.
Right.
I really don't ever
mhm,
think like when I'm trying to do this, I'm not thinking, "Ah, I'm gonna get them," right? I'm thinking, "Oh man, that makes the rating community look really, really bad." And that's really not how it is. Not everyone is like that. It might suck that they have that experience, but I might be like, "Hey, like what experience did you have?" Or, "Hey, can you tell me a bit more about that?" Or, "What makes you say that?" Now, if they want to get offended because of some of the things that I say, maybe I need to think more and type more words, I guess. But I don't know. I think that they
Yeah.
also have a choice, right? There's always a choice for how you respond to things. You can decide if you want to view them in the worst possible light, or you can decide to be slightly charitable and
Yeah.
not always assume that
Th-
people are,
this is a fine line.
trying to be rude.
I think this is a fine line, because I definitely see where both of you are coming from here, and I think that you have to be cautious and very careful with the way you handle these situations 100%. I think that, yeah, you definitely want to be delicate and considerate within reason, but I also think you've got to be super careful with not enabling bad behavior. I think if you're too forgiving of people not being, say, receptive to feedback, you are in a world of pain, right? Because I think that it's absolutely okay to acknowledge that some players or some people are not in a position where they have the kind of like the social skills or social experience to be receptive to communication sometimes. I think that's totally fine. And I agree with Emi completely. We should absolutely try to be able to communicate with people who are in different stages in their journey. But, and there's a big but, I think you also have to make it clear that there are standards that you have to aim for and try to get to. Because otherwise, if you don't make that clear, you enable the other end of toxicity, right? If you have a bunch of people and you kind of pander to them a little bit and say, "Oh, it's okay if you're not receptive to feedback. Oh, it's okay if you're kind of rude to me, because I'll be considerate." Well, now, okay, now we've created this behavior. Now the behavior is going to perpetuate itself. And this is something that I do see a lot. This is not just some kind of meme. I actually think this is one of the things that plagues static groups in particular, actually, is an inability to communicate and an inability to be receptive because players don't develop that skill. I know this sounds really try-hard, but the reason this sounds quite almost academic, by the way, everyone, is because we've kind of hit bedrock here, right? Like we're discussing some very weirdly fundamental ideas for tea time. Welcome to 2023 tea time, by the way. But yeah, I think you have to be careful with this. It needs to be a bit of both. It needs to be, we are considerate, we absolutely do our best to communicate, and not get toxic or not be aggressive when at all possible, or simply choose not to communicate. Pick your battles, right? But I do think it's important that there has to be mutual respect. There's got to be give and take, and people have got to play the game. It takes two to tango, as they say. And players must, if you want to exist in this social environment, then ultimately, yeah, there are rules. There are expectations that people are going to have, right? You can't just act like a dick and be sensitive all the time and expect people to constantly give you the benefit of the doubt and constantly kind of accept this behavior, because I think that is actually equally as toxic as, like, as the opposite, right? Where you just kind of flame people out.
I completely agree. I want to add, like, we've mentioned this multiple times throughout this entire discussion, but there's obviously a sliding scale here, right? It's like some people just have zero tolerance whatsoever, because that is not worth their time to expend the mental energy to deal with those kinds of people. And honestly, I think that's completely fine. And then you have people on kind of the other end of the extreme. I would actually consider myself to be here, where I tend to be very forgiving of these types of people. I'll go out of my way over and over again to kind of maybe pull them over to the, like, light side, right? It's like it's just like I enjoy it, right? I enjoy that kind of social interaction. I find that to be like a reason why I stream a lot. So I understand a lot of people might not have that mental bandwidth, but then there's also a lot of people kind of in the middle, where it's like, okay, they give them a chance once, they mess up that chance, they're gone, right? So that's kind of like strike one. You have some people who have like 3 strikes, right? It's like, okay, they did this 3 times, all right, I'm out, peace out, you're on your own now. And then you have people who are kind of like complete pushovers, and then that sort of thing. So I think obviously there should be a standard, right? Like, I think if someone is coming in and telling you that you're like homophobic because you're something something and like coming completely out of left field, obviously nobody should tolerate that, right? And it's like, if someone is like dropping profanity and like racial slurs and all that kind of stuff, obviously you shouldn't put up with that. But what I think is happening a lot is the people who are, venting in these sorts of public spaces and stuff, usually it's not because they genuinely feel that way. It's an emotional response, right? It's because they had a bad time or something bad happened, whether it was related to the game or unrelated, or maybe they're just going through a really bad time mentally. And a lot of times, I think meeting that with empathy is a lot better than meeting it with anger.
Is it wrong to think that that's just not the appropriate place to vent?
I mean, yes, but you can't police that, right? That's not our job to police that.
I'm not saying I would, but if somebody's going and they're like attacking raiders or something in a public forum because they had one bad experience, and they're just like, oh, all people are evil that do raids. Should never have been added to the game. Blah 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 blah. Is that really the appropriate method of handling those emotions? I would argue that's probably not the best place to put those things,
I don't disagree, probably not, but it's like, I also think that the number of people who do that versus just talk within their own communities that they had a bad rating experience is outnumbered 10 to 1. Right? It's like, for every one person that is like unfairly venting in a very public space in a very like, emotionally driven way, I don't think that happens very often. And when it does, I kind of agree with Jaws, just like block and move on, right? It's like those people, maybe they're just going through a really rough time.
Yeah,
I think the concern is that it's still very harmful, right? Like, that's the thing. Oh yeah, it's very harmful if this happens. Yeah, I do. I think so. Yeah.
If it's a random person with 10 followers that's getting no likes and they're just yelling it out into the
on like Twitter, yeah, sure. On like Twitter, like, who cares? But on the forums, on the subreddit, in the game, in like map chat, yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So
especially if it's directly.
Are we able to apply the same thing to this, in the sense that we like just push the good narrative so hard that type of thing doesn't matter?
Yes, that's the solution.
It has to come off as authentic, though.
Right.
That's really important.
Yes, 100%. Because like I'm someone who is an extremely sensitive person. Like I am. Like I'm the type of person where if I see something like that, or if they're like having a bad day, whatever, I'll give them one chance. I'll be like, hey, look, etc. Like blah blah blah. I'm sorry you're having a rough time. Is there anything I can do to help? Whatever. And if they continue to give me shit, then that's it. Like I don't have the energy. I'm tired. Like I stopped caring after that point. But if I can contribute to the positive experiences more and help spread that more, I will do that. Like I will put way more effort into that because of what we talked about before, because that matters a lot more when it's in droves. Like, and if we can drown out that negative experience with these droves of positive experiences, I feel like that's so much better. Like, especially in terms of like usage of energy and time. Like, yes, I will help people who may be having a bad one, who may be going through it for that time. But if it's too much energy that I'm willing to put in, then that's it. I'm done.
Yeah.
So do
No.
you think that when we experience these things so rather than even address it, so one of the reasons that I address these things is because I think it's disrespectful to try to drown it out, to ignore them and to be like, I'm just going to put a bunch of really positive experiences and then just never talk to them or acknowledge them. You know, I don't know.
To make sure I'm clear, you're talking about the negative experiences,
it kind of depends
right?
on the context, but
you're talking about the negative experiences, right? Like,
so let's say that somebody in map chat is going off about raids. I have two options. I can address it and be like, oh man, it sucks you had the bad experience. Like, here's maybe some ways we can get you a positive one, or, try to address it in that way and say, hey, not all experiences are like this, but, validate that maybe they had a bad experience. You have that option, or you have let's drown out the bad, right? And just type a bunch of like really positive experiences in to push their thing away. I guess one of the reasons that I try to address people is I try to flip the bad thing into a good one. Make the red go green, if you will.
I think you can do both. I think you can try to address that, as you said, and be like, hey, that sucks. Is there anything we can do to, like, maybe remedy this or give you a better experience or whatever? And if there isn't, then for me personally, I'll move on, because one of the healthier things about like engaging with stuff like that is knowing when to disengage. Is like it seems to me that you have a higher threshold of that than I do, and that's obviously very, very good. That's very okay. But like for me, it's like I know that there may be a point where I may not be able to help because of me as a person, and I need to back off.
Yeah, and I mean, there are certainly lots of times when I'm like, I'm not equipped to handle this, or this isn't my place, or whatever. I guess,
right.
And honestly, I see a lot of the stuff, and frankly, I don't engage a lot. I used to engage with everything. Now I engage with select things.
Like
I used to really put myself in a bad way, and it was like affecting my own health because I was constantly battling a losing battle.
So I think it's like it's up to you, the person, what you can handle and how to go about it the most efficiently as efficiently as possible relative to what you can handle.
Yeah, I guess really all I'm trying to get at though is if we're coming at this from purely let's help produce a positive narrative when we see negative narratives, is it completely contextual? Is it just like you have to decide on the fly if you're going to try to drown it out or if you're going to try to address it, or do you not do either?
That's what I do. I do it on the fly. I just wing it. Like it's I don't think there's like a clear cut answer, because it obviously depends on the person, depends on you, depends on like what you feel like doing, depends on how the person's interacting. Like if they're being like actively hostile, then typically I won't even bother. If they seem like they're like genuinely having a bad experience and I feel like I can maybe try to help, then yeah, sure. If it's not that big of if it doesn't cost too much of my bandwidth, sure. But there is a point where I'm just like, maybe I can't help or anything like that. And I don't think we have to drown out necessarily, but I think it's also fine to do so depending on the situation.
Yeah, maybe it's not drowning out. Maybe it's you create enough positive experiences to where that person wouldn't have the negative one to begin with.
That's also something as well.
Yeah, or create enough positive experiences where they may reconsider and give it another shot.
Yeah. I think honestly, a lot of this is, I think, fluffy talk for just like, we just want the game to be a good place where people can have fun in, right? I think that's where it all just kind of boils down. It's like, I think for the most part, that is what it is, right? It's like what Teapot was saying before. That is the reality that currently exists in the game. Most people just log on, do their thing, have a grand old time, and then log off and just kind of forget about it, right? That's just like how the game is. But I think helping push the narrative that, like, we're here for a common goal, which is just we're playing a game, we want to have fun, we want to improve, or you don't want to improve, I guess. I don't know, something like that. But at the end of the day, we're here to just have a good time. Right. And I think that's the narrative that we want to be pushing. And I think that's why kind of creating these positive experiences for other people will kind of naturally push the narrative in that direction. And then I think I just kind of want to like address some of the comments that I saw like in here. And I think this probably missed
Oh.
like kind of the beginning part of
Oh.
my personal spiel, which is that yeah, it's not your responsibility. You're not supposed to play therapist for other people, especially if they don't want it. And like, sometimes like in this MMO, people can be a little bit sensitive, like that sort of thing. But isn't it just the nice thing to do to like help people out if you see that they're like struggling? Like, it's like maybe they're not in a position where they can receive that help. Maybe it's not your job. Maybe it's not your responsibility. But isn't it, I don't know, that's just the definition of empathy, right? It's like you see someone that might not be having a great time and then you see something that you can do to potentially help them out. Why not just do it? It's like,
I
I
have
don't
a
know.
very extreme doomer response. And it's so my opinion is, and it's it's really weird among MMO gamers in particular. A lot of MMOs really hyperfixate on min-maxing things, and empathy is not something you can min-max. So
Yeah.
they don't do it.
Yep. And I think like, and again, I see some people saying no. And the thing is, I think that's totally fine. Like, that isn't your responsibility. If you log onto the game and you're just here to like, worry about your own thing, that is completely within your own right to do so. Right. It's like, I think that's fine. But if you are able to, then there's no harm to like helping other people. Right. It's like if other people are trying to go out of their way to help other people, I don't think that should be looked down upon.
Right. And you don't have to be a psychiatrist to help people. Like, it's okay to help people, but like it's the same, not their responsibility as if it's not their responsibility in like a raid group, for example. It's not like people see it as it's not a person's responsibility to make sure another person is doing acceptable DPS. They'll just kick them. It's the same logic. And does it suck? Kinda. But I feel like if you're someone in your community who is invested in your community, then it'd be kind of nice to, be able to help your community, because without your community, you have no game. And you don't have to go this far out your way. You don't have to be a psychiatrist or a therapist or anything like that. But, be a little nicer. It's free. And it's not that hard.
It is free. Good to be nice.
I'm conscious of the time here, because I this was a big one.
Yeah, this is a really long one.
Yeah. So I think that's it costs nothing to be kind to people. Be a little nicer. I think that's a great place to kind of wrap things up. Does anyone have any kind of closing thoughts on the kind of the topics today with everything that's going on? Then we can probably wrap things up about here, I think.
Yeah. No real closing for me. Like, I'm not gonna play Catalyst. I legitimately don't get it, but it's fine. And yeah, just like what I said before, just like, try to be nicer to each other. Like I know we're not all, hyper hardcore, and that's okay too. Like, we're all people in the end.
Yeah, I think one of my personal biggest takeaways for anytime this discussion comes up is that I think it's a lot more important to talk to people in a way that will convince them to enact change than it is to talk to people and prove to them that you are correct. And I don't think this is true for anyone in this like set of 4 people on the podcast, but I see this a lot outside of like the content creation sphere, where a lot of times when people enter these sort of combative discussions and stuff, especially in-game forums, or sorry, in-game chat or in the forums or on Reddit or on social media, that sort of thing, they always go into the fight with the intention of shutting this person down, showing them that they're wrong, exposing or like T-posing on them, right? Like exerting dominance, like that sort of thing. And I think that is extremely harmful. I think just not even just to the game, but to like each other as human beings, right? That's just like kind of a dick thing to do. So it's like if we go into I guess these kinds of discussions, which is just the idea like, okay, you know what, I'm going to try to convince this person to maybe do things a little bit better. I think everything will like, I don't know, life would just be so much better, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I think
So
my
it's like,
closing statement is like, oh,
Do
sorry.
it.
Sorry, go ahead.
He admits it's a debate. Closing statement, Sneb. You have 2
Oh,
minutes.
wait,
for a-
you said closing statement.
Yeah,
Sorry, Emmy, I didn't mean to interrupt you though. Did you?
yeah,
Did you
you're
have?
good.
Okay. I guess my closing statement is games are recreational activities. They're about having fun. And if you're not having fun, you're probably doing it wrong for yourself. And if you're not having fun, you might want to evaluate how the game is making you feel and if it's worth playing.
Yep.
And along with that, if you are going around and making it so that everyone else isn't having fun, that's a big problem. It's important to respect each other, even if you might have differing opinions, especially when it comes to what content you like, especially in a game like Guild Wars 2, where there's so many different little niche communities, whether it's world versus world or PvP or raids or open world. Just respect that everyone can have fun in their own unique way and do your best to spread a positive message.
Okay. Yeah, as someone whose literal job is to play MMOs, like if I can have fun, y'all can too. Like it's because God, why am I doing this?
Yeah, actually, I have one more thing. This is
Oh,
to the
okay.
ArenaNet devs that are potentially listening in here. Please adjust the settings even more. What you guys did like a few months ago, that was fantastic, where they changed like the strafe and like the melee attack assist and all that kind of stuff. Please like zoom out the FOV just a teensy tiny little bit more. Make the chat box like darkened by default. I don't know, like make the UI bigger or something like that. Just very, very small things to hopefully facilitate better communication in game. Thank you.
Please
And
buff Virtuoso. It is not good. It
yes,
Whoa,
yes,
Very
yes.
bad.
And the
Please,
block
please
is way
buff
too
Mesmer,
short.
all variants
I
of
would also like
Mesmer.
if there was an F6 that did instant
Another.
100k DPS.
Oh, wow.
Please,
Yes.
please,
Yeah.
please
Mhm.
help.
Sounds like
All
a
right,
good
if we're
idea.
talking about
we cannot play the purple class.
if we're talking about buffs, then you know what? No, I can't.
Yeah. Yeah, okay.
I'm gonna say Bulwark Gyro, 10k HP.
Yeah.
No damage.
But yes, gamers, that's going to about wrap things up for TeaTime. What a great way to end it. And I think that, honestly, my kind of final statement is going to be, I want to hear what everyone has to say, right? If you're in the comments right now, definitely, leave a comment. Let us know what you think. Join my Discord as well. I'll actually try and have a proper discussion going about this TeaTime, because it's actually one of the topics that I actually really feel strongly about. I view it as one of the biggest problems in the game is this communication factor, is the social cohesion of the game and how the different communities interact with each other. And I think we had a great discussion today. So a massive thank you to my host today. We're going to be going over exactly who they are and where you can find them in just a few moments. But anyway, yeah, I really hope everyone enjoyed and thought this was an interesting discussion. I think it was very productive, very interesting. If a few spicy moments, and I like that. I like a little spice, in there, and hopefully the comments will remain the same. And of course, I definitely want to echo these sentiments here. I think that when we're interacting in an online game, I think we should be working together, not against each other, and we should get along and we can help each other out and hopefully move towards a more positive experience, because I really think that Guild Wars 2, it does have systems that mean that I think content can be accessed by everyone. It's one of the best things about the game. I don't think that anyone should feel like they're locked out or they can't do something in the game if they want to, because I absolutely believe that they can. And, I hope to continue to build structures and facilitate players engaging in these systems and enjoying the game in any way that they see fit. So that's basically a bit of a roundup there. But anyway, let's see what we got here. New guest here today. I think we'll go first there. So, in the bottom left corner, it is Anthony Lowry. Let us know where we can find you. What do you up to these days?
So I am a journalist when people like my writing and just a writer when people don't. You can find me on mmorpg.com. I write about most MMOs that I'm playing, but primarily Guild Wars 2, and like a couple of others. But you can find me there. You can find me on Twitter at AULowry. And yeah, I don't stream yet. Maybe. We'll see. And yeah, that's about it.
Very cool. Thank you very much for hopping on board the show. Let's go up there. First of our two debaters. it is Sneb.
Hello. I actually think it was really productive. I think that, well, at least it was for my side. I think I learned a lot, and I think that's what debates or discussions should really be about, is seeing people's opinions and learning from them and growing from them. Anyway, you can find me at twitch.tv/Snebzor, SNEBZOR. And I do a lot of raid training. I have a guild where we help people find groups. We're like basically Tinder for raids. We're both on the NA and EU server. So you can find us there at discord.gg/SkaneGang. That's SKEINGANG. And on Twitter /Snebzor. So that's where I am.
Boom. And Emi has destroyed us all after preparing for this debate. Big listening to podcasts, research, academic documents written. What are your thoughts? And what's going on with you?
Hello. Yeah, so my name is Emi. I do a lot of endgame PvE shenanigans, mostly focused around new players. So things like raid trainings, fractal trainings, strike mission trainings. Recently, we've had a bit more of a focus on the higher end content. So we've been training some of the strike mission challenge modes. And actually, I have a reoccurring Harvest Temple challenge mode progression group going now. So we're on group number 3. We're going to be starting on February 1st, and hopefully we can finish within a month. If we can, then I'm going to start making that into a super regular thing. So probably at least one prog group per month or one prog group every other month. So if you are interested in that, feel free to let me know. I will say my standards for that group will be quite high because my goal is to get people who are already operating at a high-end Guild Wars 2 level and then getting them exposure and getting them the organization for the fight so we can get more Void Walkers and stuff. So yeah, that's my mini advertisement there. But yeah, honestly, I tried to prepare for this one. There's this podcast that someone in my community recommended to me, so I was just listening to that while I was going to the gym and stuff. But we actually didn't get to touch on too many of the topics, but that's okay. I will.
That's for next
I will
time.
Sneak on. Yeah, I'll sneak onto your stream and we'll have impromptu
very good.
I don't know, Emi times or something.
Yes,
so.
very good. That's what we like to see. And of course, I guess it's me as well. You know, I'm just here gaming. You can watch the stream. I mean, you're already watching it, so you might as well continue doing so. You know, you could follow it. You could go on YouTube, watch all the other tea times. And yeah, this time, really let us know what you think. Hop on board the Discord. We'll talk about it. And it'll be great, right? Like, please follow everyone here. I think this was a really good tea time. Definitely a very strong start. I like it. I like it. I'm going to try to do a little bit. You know, look, listen, I'm just coping with the zero content we have in Guild Wars 2. But no, in all seriousness, I actually do want to kind of mix it up a little bit and try to make tea time consistent and talk about a few different things. Talk about, you know, not just about what's happening, but a few meta topics as well. Like this one, which I think are actually really important. Have been something that has been a struggle since the very beginning of the game. So I hope you all enjoyed it very much. Make sure to follow everyone here. You can find links, of course, in the chat right now, below the stream, in the YouTube video description as well. So that's it. Thank you, gamers, so much for watching. Really hope you've enjoyed it. Once again, thank you to my wonderful hosts for joining me today. We will see you all next time. We're out of here. Farewell, friends. Woo!
Spicy time.